Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Boozer. I'm with CUGC HQ, and I am happy to welcome you to our third User Share XL event. This is our second one that is focused on security. So we have three great sessions for you today, and I am excited to get us started. So before I do, want to go through our agenda really quickly. So our first session is with Scott Fanning and Praveen Raghuraman, and he and Scott are going to take a look at Citrix Access Control for us. Following on that, we have Patrick Coble. He's going to tell us how to defend our Citrix castle. And then our final session of the day is with Chris Rogers, and he's going to tell us what happens when security goes wrong. So we have three great sessions for you. We hope you'll stick around for all three, but just in case you can't, we are recording the sessions today and they'll be available to you in a follow-up email as well as on mycugc.org. All right, so before we get started, I just want to tell you who's on our first session with us. So Scott Fanning and Praveen Raghuraman are both with Citrix. They are available on Twitter, as you can see, so be sure to follow them. They're going to start out with a high-level look at what Citrix Access Control is, and then get into a little bit deeper look at access control. I think we're going to get into a little bit of a demo and see what all it can do for you. So before I hand over to them, I want to let you know that Samuel Legrand is going to be taking a look at the questions in the question panel for us today. Samuel is a leader of the France CUGC group. He is a CTP, and you can follow him on Twitter at legsam59. Samuel, would you like to say hello to everyone?
Bonjour from Paris, France.
Thank you, Samuel. Samuel does come to us from Paris, so we are happy to have him on. It's a little bit later in the day for him, and I do appreciate him giving us the time today. All right, so as I mentioned, Samuel is going to keep an eye on the questions. We're going to save all of the questions from this session for the end. So do type them in the question panel as you have them, but we'll ask them at the end. And with that, I'm going to hand things right over to Scott and Praveen. So I am sending the screen your way. And
okay.
Here it comes.
Excellent. All right, fantastic. All right, well, we'll introduce ourselves and we'll get into it. So my name is Scott Fanning. I'm the Senior Director of Product Management for Workspace Security. I'm really excited to be here today and virtually to talk to you about the Access Control Service. I'll be focusing more on the kind of Citrix strategy and the high-level view of it. And then my colleague Praveen here will get into the details. Praveen?
Hi, my name is Praveen Raghuraman. I'm Director of Products responsible for the Workspace Security team. I'm focused on the access control and the gateway products, and I'll be talking about the solution and kind of what are the capabilities and how are we actually protecting the workspace. Back to you, Scott.
All right, thanks, Praveen. So when we talk about cybersecurity and our security strategy here at Citrix, we look at it from three different kind of points of view. The first part is about increasing trust. When I talk to security practitioners in the market, if you ask a CISO what their responsibility is, part of it is about how they can improve trust in their enterprise environment. Trust typically has things such as, how do I establish trust? How do I identify the users to understand their roles and responsibilities in that trusted environment? How do I enforce trust throughout the different points in my network? And what are the policies that are applied to how I leverage trust to access your applications and your networks? The second portion is, how do you reduce risk? So reducing risk is all about, first of all, getting full visibility of your network. You can't protect what you can't see, and you also need to assess which of your assets have the most risk and don't. So having full visibility is very critical to understanding how do you protect your enterprise. The second part about reducing risk is analytics. You know, one of the great things about artificial intelligence, it's really expanded the ability to take the visibility and the digital exhaust from all these different elements of your deployment and bringing those into a place where you can get really actionable insights. Analytics is like the brain behind the brawn of the access control service. So it's able to take a look at all these different things. And so what's really important is that analytics is all about how do you reduce the risk, because once you have visibility, then you want to take action. That action translates into automation. Cybersecurity threats are very fast-moving and generally faster than your ability to see it and respond to it. And so having automation be able to trigger based upon certain thresholds that we see allows you to get between detect and protect very quickly. And the last is contextual access. You know, one of the challenges with cybersecurity in general is that usually it's like a giant hammer. And the way you turn it into a scalpel is basically looking at contextual access, looking at what the person's doing, what kind of assets they're accessing, and then deriving controls from that and actions to be able to close loop and get to the point of protection. So you don't necessarily want to add friction unless the friction is warranted, and contextual access is that opportunity for us to do that. So the last thing is, Citrix is also about experience. And I look at experience as not something that has to be in conflict with increasing trust and reducing risk. I actually think when you look at cybersecurity, you want to look at it as how can it actually expand the ability to get experience. So I look at it from two perspectives. One is the end user. When you start imposing security, what you want is not to add friction because you're adding the security control. You want to maybe add friction in the sense of the contextual access portion of it, or something has told you that friction is warranted. But a lot of security controls, for instance, us constantly adding to change your password or doing multi-factor authentication on every application. That's needless friction that gets in the way of the end user experience. And when you add too much friction, what ends up happening is customers move away from the security controls that you want them to use and find workarounds. And that generally makes the CISO's job very difficult. You also want it ubiquitous. Yeah, you don't want some security controls for some things and not the same security controls for others. I actually think you need to have a fairly steady state view of security controls, all of them contributing to understanding your security posture and feeding into the contextual analytics. Then you want it to be informative. End users tend to be one of the initial vectors of cybersecurity woes. So you want something that kind of guides the users away from doing malicious activity and kind of rewarding them for doing good behavior. So having a good experience around security and end user behavior is very important. But then there's also the operator side of things. So one thing about security is you can get event fatigue, lots of events happening. So you want insight, but you don't want, events. Events are very binary. Insight is very actionable. So you want whatever experience for the operator is, whatever they're seeing is something that is insightful to them. You want it connected. You want each of the different systems to be connected kind of as out of the box as you can do it. An average enterprise can have anywhere from 60 to 90 security controls, and some of these controls overlap with each other, diminishing the actual benefit. So if you can create a solution that connects a lot of these controls in one place and orchestrates these things, then the protection outcome is more clear. And this is where integrated comes in. This is not integrated to each other. This is integrated into the actual product. We're talking about workspace security. We're talking about how you want to get work done. And you want to remove, you want that security controls to be integrated into that user experience so that from an operator's perspective, when they start creating policies, they're connecting to how the end user actually is going to do their job. So these are kind of the core attributes of our security strategy. And of course, it's going to be all about hybrid delivery and choice. The reality is, as much as the cloud is very important, a lot of customers will deliberately choose which assets to move into the cloud and which assets not to move into the cloud. And that will be based upon risk and trust models. So we're about protecting both your in a hybrid world, assets like SaaS applications that you may be having in the cloud, but also your web apps and your apps that you have hosted on-prem, and offering a consistent user experience while increasing trust and reducing risk. So these are the kind of the triangulated strategies for our Citrix security. So let's talk about all the different elements that bring into what we call the secure digital perimeter. We have the user view, and we have the IT and networking view. And Citrix has always had a very strong play in providing protection. We've always been in the security business. What we're trying to do now is orchestrate by design all the different elements that we have so that you as the customer aren't necessarily dealing with all these different blocks, while you're really dealing with the outcome of protection. So whether it's not unifying that experience or providing a federated view of identity, which means you can bring your own identity system and we'll embrace that and use it with your customers. A single sign-on, because having many different SaaS applications and you have to sign on individually, it's a known industry problem. That creates actually weaker passwords. It actually creates fatigue in terms of the user experience. So to me, single sign-on is a very critical part. Contextual access, you're going to see that in performance today. The ability to understand the telemetry of the user and then creating meaningful insight and action and closed-loop controls around that. And then, performance actually plays an important part of security as well. When you start seeing degraded performance, it could be because of, maybe certain application characteristics, but it could also be an indicator of potential security challenges. So performance and security are very much go hand in hand. So, when I look at, the other elements of this as well, we'll also look at how productivity and integration and security shouldn't get in the way of it. And we also have about choice. So a unified endpoint management, how we bring that into the contextual access controls will also be very important as well. All these things in concert create this idea of a secure digital perimeter that should protect your users from malicious threats. So what's interesting about the SaaS world is that there's a lot of SaaS applications, and they're becoming more and more business critical as you do your business. And it's gaining a lot of adoption. The interesting thing is the SaaS applications themselves afford your ability to get work done, but how do you retain your perimeter while you're using these SaaS applications? And so we're going to show you how you can do that, where you can still have access to these applications and get work done, but from a perimeter perspective, you still retain control, and you can put reasonable limits on how you get these controls depending on your circumstances. So what are some of the challenges with SaaS adoption? Well, one of them is managing single sign-on, right? So each of these SaaS applications, you have, especially the first-class citizens, you have to configure maybe their IDP to different IDPs. What's really interesting is that you're seeing more businesses merge with each other. They start creating a fractured view of single sign-on. You have different single sign-on opportunities. So this is about bringing those together, federating them so that we can control kind of the front door of that user experience and kind of abstract away the complexity of dealing with various single sign-on vendors. So whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, our ability to consolidate that and federate that allows us to create a really good user experience while maintaining a consistent security control. Also, what's also interesting is contextual access to apps. So if you're in a coffee shop and you are looking at Salesforce.com and you're looking at sales information, you may want to look at how you control that experience differently than if you're doing it on premises. And so this is where the interesting parts of contextual access become really important. So it protects you from malicious content, but it also uses that fine scalpel of security controls at the right circumstance. So it's a really important element, and we'll see that demonstrated today. So protecting intellectual property in the cloud and SaaS apps to stay compliant is another problem. In fact, if you talk to a lot of the SaaS providers, they will give you a shared responsibility model. They will, you have, control over the SaaS application, but the actual data itself is still your responsibility to protect. So protecting intellectual property is a very key element and challenge of SaaS adoption. And finally, it's really about visibility and closed loop control. So, how do we, understand the risk profiles of your users using these SaaS applications, and how do you take advantage of that visibility to create closed loop controls so that when you see something happening in an automated fashion, you quickly can remediate that problem without necessarily any human intervention, or at least with informed consent. So that's a very important security element as well. So, as we're looking at how to do this, there are different ways to do it, and so I'm going to hand it over to Praveen, and he's going to talk about the journey from where kind of traditional security controls sit today and how contextual access can help solve your security problems. Praveen?
Great. Thank you very much, Scott. I mean, that is awesome. Basically, kind of getting us to the point of understanding from a broader security strategy perspective how we can actually take the step and go into the details of what we can provide as capabilities within access control. So, as Scott outlined, right, there are a variety of different controls that are available. I mean, clearly, we need to have the right tools and the right capabilities. When you look at the ability to actually deliver applications securely, they actually fall in three broad categories, right? One is your, enterprise applications. And what people have been doing is whether these are legacy applications or whether these are applications that you control, you delivered them through data centers, and being able to, use that in the public cloud, typically had a proxy, right? And Citrix has been very good at being able to do that in the context of, NetScaler and all the capabilities that we've had over the years. But at the same time, you also have new and emerging use cases about unsanctioned content, unsanctioned SaaS, which actually get intertwined in how people are doing work. And not only that, there are challenges in terms of bringing these applications and having them delivered as SaaS in public cloud. So some of the common ways that current solutions exist are obviously, you consolidate through single sign-on and reduce the overall threat of sharing passwords. But at the same time, you bring in elements of web filtering and a lot of other components that are required to govern unsanctioned content. So we have a very unique approach that we believe will be actually something that we can offer, being Citrix, in the context of workspace to protect how people are doing work and bringing a common way of delivering these applications. So, and that's what we're actually calling as Citrix Access Control. It's one solution. It consolidates the different areas or different actually capabilities into one single service. But the main thing to remember is that security is an overlay on top of what you do as part of your work, right? So it's important that we recognize the amount of administrative burden that that actually goes in delivering these applications. So that's been a core design center for us. That's why we have combined the ability to have unique cloud app controls along with the ability to actually provide remote access and deliver that in the context of single sign-on, along with built-in web filtering and secure browser isolation capabilities. So at this point in time, it would actually be good to sort of get some, maybe a poll question on, Stephanie, maybe that we could get some audience input on, what kind of profile of people we have on this call and what are some of the challenges that they're seeing.
Okay, sure. You want me to start with the first question then with the who are we?
Yep. Yeah, that's right. Yep.
All right, that poll is out there. Looks like we're about 50-50.
Great. Okay.
Yep, pretty close.
Actually, that's kind of typical of what we expect. I mean, we do expect a lot of people who are in a security, purchasing or influencing decisions. And obviously, there are a lot of other people who probably may not directly be involved in security, but they're still interested in ensuring that the products that they deliver are secure. So that actually is a great kind of way to understand the demographics of kind of the people we have on the call, which is great. Now, let's actually get into specifically what are the unique capabilities of access control that we want to see. And so we want to understand, right, that what kind of tools that you currently use today, which will help us, sort of address the core strategies that we are putting in place for customers to use.
Okay, looks like getting close to half voting. So far, it looks like some tools is taking the lead. Give you just a few more seconds. All right, and pencils down. There you go. Yep. Some tools, so right in the middle.
Right, and I think that's very indicative of basically the fact that yes, most people believe that they will appreciate and need more capabilities that are actually available as part of the different controls that we are offering. So I think this is a great data point for us in how we are thinking about access control and all the things that we're building as part of Workspace to secure access to different applications. So let's actually get into the solution itself. So Scott talked about the core components of experience, trust, as well as analytics. And that's actually the foundation of how we have built access control. So let me get you kind of fast forward to the three capabilities or three areas that we are addressing. One is we've built single sign-on as a core capability of Workspace. So whether you're starting with a Sas application or a web application, or whether it's apps and desktops, we're able to do that single sign-on and make that overall process extremely simple and easy. But in that process, what we're also doing is extending the ability to use this capability across the unified experience on Workspace. But where it really becomes challenging from an IT perspective is now being able to deliver the capabilities that provide the right level of friction, but enhance the overall security posture. So we built some unique controls, which we actually call as enhanced security for SaaS applications. Along with that, we're also doing the ability to actually isolate content when it's considered risky or not trustworthy into a browser isolated environment through the secure browser service. And also being able to apply very unique policies that are governed to allow, deny, or redirect content through that secure browser. And the third thing we're actually doing is making sure that we are providing the visibility and all the reporting so that you get a very good understanding of not only from the app perspective, from a user perspective, what does that risk surface look like and what does the behavior look like, so that you can go ahead and instrument policy and make changes as required. So let's go into how the solution looks like. So access control is delivered on Citrix Cloud as a group of multiple tiles that actually are either independent services, but then we're also bringing that together to deliver the overall capability. So I believe most of you are maybe familiar with the Gateway service, which is actually what you use to do single sign-on. And what we've done is we've actually enhanced that to build in more templates for doing SAML-based single sign-on capabilities. Along with that, the secure browser service, which actually allows you to do secure browsing and have a isolated component within which all web content is rendered. But where we actually bring it all together with access control is also by enabling Citrix Analytics, which gives you the ability to get that overall risk score and then understand different kinds of anomalies when people are using, when your customers and users are using actually SaaS applications. So, and all of this is tied to Workspace app, which is where the unified experience of how people do their work and how we protect all the applications is delivered. So let's go into the solution. First thing is that we have pre-built SaaS application templates for most popular SaaS apps that are in the marketplace today. This is a library that we keep expanding. So all the common applications such as Salesforce or Workday or any of the ones that are commonly used are readily available. It's a very simple process to actually publish an application, and you can govern which specific user has access. So based on that user's AD credentials or whatever the IDC mechanism we provide, we are able to restrict exactly who gets access to which application as part of the publishing workflow. At this time, we have started with SAML 2.0 as the main standard that we're supporting, and in the future, we're looking at many other different formats to expand that capability. Now let's look at how we make this single sign-on configuration process actually easy. So one of the challenges is not only configuring single sign-on, but being able to set up the certificate and the assertion parameters on the service provider side. So this is where you actually go into maybe your Salesforce account or your Workday account or whatever it is, whichever application, and being able to set up the SAML metadata. So what we've done is we actually have a link here which actually allows you to download the metadata and you can export it and import it into your SaaS application. Many providers actually allow you to do that. That simplifies the overall process of setting up the SAML parameters. And you can also, of course, go ahead and download it, and we have documentation which actually points and tells you exactly how do you extract those fields and set it up. It's a fairly simple and easy process, and the documentation helps you to make sure that you are actually able to set up a SAML single sign-on very easily and quickly. But where really it becomes interesting is taking the next step beyond single sign-on and providing that enhanced security control. So we have a set of enhanced security controls that actually govern exactly what the end user can or cannot do. And so I talked about the coffee shop example with Salesforce, where you might actually want to restrict and ensure that there is no leakage of any public information, any private or IP information that might be actually confidential. So you have the ability to then, at that point in time, say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and restrict what kind of actions that they can do within that browser. And this is governed through these security controls that you actually see on the screen. One important point is that this is governed on a per application basis. So for applications that don't need this enhanced level of security, you obviously do not need to turn on, and you can be very granular on exactly which of these security controls are actually turned on and off on a per application basis. What we also do now is, along with the security controls, is the ability to actually categorize all the access that is happening within your SaaS application. So this is where, typically you would see a separate product or a capability that gives you URL classification, categorization, and then allows you to actually, deny or allow access to specific URLs or URL categories. The one thing that we do is we actually look at also reputation of every single URL, classify that, and feed that into our analytics engine. So based on the machine learning models, we are able to actually qualify every single access and feed that data to compute a user behavior risk score. Why is this important? Because going back to the same example, you can now instrument policy on a very granular level based on what that user can or cannot do, whether actually we can block maybe session recording or do certain or restrict certain other actions, or even say that, we're not going to enable access for certain type of category of applications because those are considered not suitable for work or not suitable at all in your unique situation. Now, one other thing that I kind of want to mention is that the whole idea of being able to block or allow has existed for quite a lot of time. What is unique in this solution is the ability to redirect those applications or those URLs that are in the middle, right? These are what we call as gray sites. We're not quite sure exactly what the risk score is, but we know that they're not necessarily required for work. So you can move in, let's say, an Instagram or a photo sharing site or some other application that probably is not necessarily required for people to do their work, but you're letting them to go and access that through a secure browser service. So that is something very, very unique. And all of this is instruments to the same single policy that I'll actually show you later in the demo. And in terms of how we make these decisions, I mean, we can get very granular in terms of exactly what kind of applications or what kind of URLs and what domains are allowed, what is blocked, and what is actually prevented, so that you can actually, instrument policy. So one thing is that what we do in the cloud is all the SaaS applications and their landing pages, which are essentially, let's say, Salesforce.com or Workday.com or what have you, those URLs, the landing page, we actually directly, we have them predefined. So we don't necessarily, introduce any friction on that. We basically go ahead and directly send that traffic over to the SaaS provider. But let's say you have any access that is happening within that SaaS application, then it goes through a pretty detailed flow. The first thing we check is that specific URL blocked, or is there a policy that denies access to that particular URL? And if that doesn't, it's not blocked, then we check if it's something that we need to redirect and display in a secure browser service environment. If that is also not the case, then we go ahead and allow it. So we are actually very granular. First, we check for the URLs before we go and check for the categories. So you can set up very specific policies where you might actually allow access to a specific, let's say, photo sharing site or a social media site, but you want to block the entire social media as a category and all the other applications. So you don't necessarily give a clean check for all kinds of access, right? So you can get very, very granular in terms of how you control that. And I'll show you later in the demo that we have some pre-built templates and presets that actually allow you to create this policy based on your risk posture. So let's look at how do we bring about all this in the context of Workspace app, and how do we actually deliver the overall experience from the end user's perspective. So if you look at the Workspace, what used to be the Earthwise Receiver has actually been significantly enhanced. The first thing is that it is the unified experience that allows you to deliver the same set of applications in a single pane of glass on different form factors, whether it's on mobile, whether it's on your desktop, or whether your end users are even accessing this through a web UI, right? So you don't necessarily need to have the app. You can even have them connect through the web UI by going to a specific Workspace URL, and they get to actually access all the different applications. What we've done with the Workspace app is we've actually enhanced it, and we've built a networking client on top of it, along with what is called as an embedded browser. This is where we actually embed a full rendering engine that allows us to now govern and control that overall experience, but also introduce the security controls and provide overall governance over the different kind of applications, such as Salesforce and Workday and what have you. So let's look at, so this is how the Workspace looks like. On a single pane of glass here, actually, I have my Sas applications. I also have my published applications like my desktop, my VDI, and everything as far as the end user is concerned that they need to do their work is there in one single place. You can obviously create favorites. Most recently, introduced our clicked applications show up in my recent tab, so it makes it easy for me to actually go ahead and start using them. But now let's look at how do we govern the overall experience based on the security controls we just talked about earlier. The first thing is that on the Workspace, when an end user clicks on a Sas application, and let's say you don't have any enhanced security that's actually been turned on, then we just open that in the native browser. So this could be IE or whatever, or Chrome or whatever native browser they've already installed. So all that access is directly going through the provider over the internet, and access control is not in the path. And at this point in time, we are not even applying any policies, right? We're doing a single sign-on. They get the access. So think of applications like maybe there's an internal portal website that people use for information about your company or things like that you may have made available on the Workspace as a convenience, and this is published as an intranet application. You know what? Maybe there's no need to introduce any security controls. You can directly go and open that in the standard browser. But what if this were an application which had IP protection requirements? So what we can do now is actually enable that enhanced security control that we talked about and get very granular on whether you want to show a watermark, whether you actually want to go and prevent things like copy paste, or how you want even the interaction to happen within the links that are embedded within that Sas application. So if that particular URL is something that we can go ahead and use, then we just allow it. There is no policy set up on top of that, and we're good to go. But let's say if that application is supposed to be something that has a threat score or something that's blocked, then we just go and deny. We provide a graceful page which says this access is restricted. And the interesting thing is, if it doesn't follow in one of these two, then we have the ability to launch a secure browser session and render all of this content within that secure browser. So now it's not a block or a deny only choice. You're actually enabling access to applications, but you're still in control and providing governance over how these SaaS applications are actually used in your environment, which makes for a much better experience than completely blocking sites. And let's actually look at how this works a little bit in detail. So whenever a request comes from Workspace app, the first thing is it actually goes, whether if you've not signed in to the Workspace, it goes and comes to our cloud. And the first thing we do is we authenticate that user, right? So this is where you authenticate into the Workspace. If for the very first time you're accessing an application, then the list of enumerated applications is sent back. On the workspace, this is when the user actually gets to see all their different applications. This could be a Sas app, this could be one of the multiple applications. In this context, we are particularly talking about all the different Sas applications that they have configured. The user initiates a connection to a sanctioned Sas app. This is when they click on, let's say, Salesforce. And here's where the interesting part is. Now, we are actually going ahead and making sure that they are single signed on. So first, we come and check for the SAML assertion. Because we are, in this case, the Citrix Cloud is the IDP, we're able to complete that SAML assertion. We have the token, and now the user is logged on. From this point on, we can use that for successive access. So let's say the first access was for Salesforce, and the next access is for, let's say, a Concur application. We already have the SAML token. We can actually proceed now and keep that and keep that for the duration of the session and let them single sign on. And one other thing happens is as the access happens, all of the content is rendered within the embedded browser and appropriate controls are applied. We're also at this point in time collecting all the analytics and the events so that we can feed it into Citrix Analytics and look for risky behavior or start, putting our machine learning models to understand and profile what activities that the end user is doing. Same experience if you're actually using a web portal. So this will be the case when your end user does not have a Citrix Workspace app installed on their client device. So they can actually directly go to the Workspace URL. Same experience if the application has enhanced security turned on, we just let it display in the standard browser. But if they have enhanced security turned on, then what we do is, in this case, we don't have a Workspace app, so we are automatically rendering this within a secure browser instance. And all of this is completely governed by policy. So whether you have the Workspace app installed or not, we will bring that app in context within a container and within the secure browser container and still be able to enforce all the policies that we talked about. So this gives you the flexibility for end users to work in case they are going to use some other devices. But in most cases, we recommend that using a Workspace app gives you sort of the best experience because it's all natively rendered within that client's device. And kind of going to the analytics aspects, what are the different things we collect? So one of the things we do is like we said, we're able to give you a quick view into the different kinds of sites that and the domains that are being accessed. Specifically, what we can also do is profile this access and classify that, whether it's malicious, dangerous, unknown, or something that's clean. And any URLs that are logged are specifically marked, and we actually go ahead and create risk indicators so that we can start using that information in calculating the overall risk on a per user basis. So a risk indicator essentially is something where we can start getting specific signals from the different kind of activities that are happening. And based on that, within Citrix Analytics, we can actually provide a very detailed view which shows you what a specific end user is doing. Now, why is this important? Because now we can go ahead and instrument and tweak policies and make sure that the right kind of applications or the right kind of URLs or categories are applied. And even you can actually go ahead and say what applications or what security controls need to be put in place so that you are, again, in compliance. Finally, one of the capabilities that we have, and we're actually on the path to rapidly expand the different kinds of authentication capabilities we have in Citrix Cloud. We have the two-factor authentication, which is natively built with OTP. That is available right now in tech preview. Very soon, we're going to make this available. And what this means is that using any third-party authenticator app, you can actually use it to add second-factor authentication for all access to Workspace. So let me go into a quick demo. Before we go into the demo, I just wanted to sort of request Stephanie to ask our next poll question on how well do we believe these capabilities might help our audience. Okay, so let's wait for the answers.
Yeah, just a few more seconds here. All right, looks like most of you have voted, so here you go. Here come the results.
Okay, so overwhelming majority of you actually seem to indicate that you would like more security controls, and a clear majority seems to be that yes, you expect SaaS and web applications and security controls to be built in, which is actually great. So I think what would be sort of nice is for us to sort of get that feedback more and develop more of these controls and capabilities, and something that we can actually talk about in a future webinar. So let me now go into the demo and kind of show you in action all the capabilities we talked about. So once you go into the Citrix interface, you see this onboarding page. The easy steps that are there are shown. What I'm going to go is first go into the library and show you all the different applications on the admin interface that have been published for the end user. You have G Suite, you have Office 365, all the different applications. I can actually go into any of these, look at who these applications have been published to, what kind of controls have been put in place. So in this case, for G Suite, what we've done is we have all the single sign-on parameters predefined, and we have enabled all the security controls. So for example, we have the copy paste turned on, we have the watermark turned on, and we also have the overall enable security controls enabled. Now we also here can see that the actually assertion parameters are set up predefined, and the metadata XML is there for you to download if you need to set it up on G Suite's interface. Now let's go into the web filtering policies. So this is where we talked about the different kinds of filters that you can set. What I've done specifically here is I've blocked 2 sites explicitly, which I know are bad. And generally, you may not need to add specific controls, but it's nice to know that I have that benefit. I've blocked a whole bunch of categories that are not that I don't consider suitable for work. And what I've also done is I've actually added some sites under the secure browser redirection policy as well. So now I'm actually going to go ahead and show you also some of the predefined templates within the interface. So here's where we have some predefined templates, such as based on your risk profile. So I have what's called as a strict, moderate, and lenient preset. What a strict preset really means is I'm going to block most of the category of applications that are not suitable for work, right? Even some of the social media sites are blocked in that case. Now let's go into the end user experience and see what is that the end user experience, what is the end user going to experience. So I clicked on G Suite. Once I access G Suite, that's my watermark because we have turned it on. So all access now is going to show my name and my IP address. So let's say somebody takes a picture, that's going to show up. It's interesting, I got some email. Let me go and check out what's going on. Okay, I have a link. There's a link to Instagram. But wait, we actually said Instagram is something that we want to be rendered within the secure browser. So automatically the secure browser shows up, and that little icon you see on the top actually indicates that it is happening in secure browser. We're also going to check out some of the policies we have set up for explicitly blocking content, and that's where you get that error message. Now let's actually go to maybe one other application like Salesforce, for which we had different set of security controls. So obviously we have the watermark, which is going to show up here. We are also blocked things like copy paste. We don't want people to actually download any of the data and send that to someone else. So the cut copy paste restrictions are showing up. But any link within my Salesforce is now going to be governed based on those web filtering policies. So my internal website is fine, but I'm going to go block other things. And quickly taking a look at the analytics views that we talked about, here is where we present to you all the different kinds of risky access that is happening over the entire period of the duration. I can actually see granularly which user is accessing what application, and even go into every little transaction and every little access on a per domain basis, right? So it makes it easy for me to go and instrument that policy that we talked about. So one other quick thing, on the app security side, we can actually provide the same level of detail and information. I'm not going to go into showing that in the interest of time, but you get the idea. So really, what Citrix Access Control does is it combines and adds security on top of how people do work and protect the whole idea of having built-in controls in the context of workspace. With that, just want to give a quick sort of information that, you can go to our citrix.cloud.com and start a free trial. Once you click on that button, we get the request, and based on your needs, we can actually go ahead and approve it. We also have a blog that goes into the details of all these capabilities as well as documentation. So you can use that to actually learn more about the application and try it out for yourself. With that, I think we can maybe take some questions now.
Yeah. We have some questions currently. The first one was about the slide deck, to know if it will be shared on my CUGC.
Yeah, so we'll basically share a PDF version of this later and post it on CUGC.
Perfect, thank you. We had another question about the SSO configuration. To know if the SAML SSO templates are going to be available for on-prem ADC or NetScaler.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Could you repeat that?
Well, yeah, when you show us the SSO configuration on the gateway, the attendee wants to know if the SAML SSO templates that you show us with the different applications that were available, if it will be available for on-prem or only in the Citrix Cloud gateway.
Yeah, so we are working on a strategy to make sure that we kind of enable access to these applications. So one of the things that we can do is, along with SaaS applications, we can also provide these security controls for hosted enterprise applications. For example, this could be SharePoint or Exchange or one of the other applications that may be hosted within your data center or within your premises. So these security controls will also apply. That capability is available under Tech Preview, and we hope to have that available soon in GA.
So that's good, because we have a lot of questions regarding the on-prem ADC, to know if it will be, for example, the web SaaS integration will be if it will be available on-prem too.
Yeah, so at this time, I mean, we're taking a lot of feedback on the different capabilities on making them available more broadly. I'm not able to comment on things on roadmap perspective right now, but I think that's very good input and something that we will go and kind of look at as we further develop our strategy.
Okay. Another interesting question about feedbacks. Again, it's about the templates for the SSO. Is there a way to ask for a new application that is not already included, or is there any way to request SaaS apps templates?
Yeah, so you can actually go ahead and add your own SaaS applications. So the process is very simple. What we showed you are all the built-in templates that we already have. But adding your own SaaS application is very easy. So yes, you can do
that. Perfect. Let me check the question that I received just now. Again, the same one. How does an organization prevent users from using a local browser to access the SaaS application? So how to avoid the access control bypass?
Yeah, so I mean, the thing is that you basically, access control capabilities can be turned on and off on a per application basis. And also you can govern within the SaaS application itself which URLs do go through our cloud. So there is a field called related URLs in the SAML SSO configuration when you set up the SaaS application. That will actually allow you to govern that level of granularity. Now, one thing is that for us to apply any of the secure browser controls or apply any of the web filtering controls, we do need that control to be, do need to be in line in the traffic path to apply that policy. So, you know, it kind of depends on exactly which applications you want to go through the cloud versus which ones you want direct access to. The one thing I would mention is once the initial single sign-on is done and all the browser-based controls are applied, we don't hairpin that traffic through the cloud. It's only if a link or a site that is considered malicious or something that is actually governed through the secure browser policy. Only those are rendered through the inline controls. Hope that answers the question.
The question was more about how you can enforce the user to use the local. If the user is using the local browser, it will access to the Sas apps because it's available on the internet. So the question was how to prevent the user to use a local browser.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, you know, ability to use maybe a native browser or other capabilities. So I think we're working on sort of, you know, addressing that question and sort of broadening the sphere of how we can bring the workspace app in context for different kinds of access. Okay. At this time, that capability is not available, but something that we're looking at.
Perfect. So I think I cover all the questions that has been asked. So Stephanie, if you want to bring back and
Okay. All right, I'll grab the screen back. Again, you guys will get a recording of today's presentation, and I will send out links also that will include links to this slide deck. So as soon as I get that, I'll put that in the follow-up email tomorrow as well. And let me... All right, so if we have no more questions, I think that I have Patrick here on the line already, so we can go ahead and start getting set up for our next session. Patrick, you're here, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, all right, there he is. And James, check your audio.
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay, all right. All right, well, first of all, I want to thank Scott and Praveen for being with us today. I really appreciate you guys showing us access control and getting into all that with us today and just being on this webinar. So thank you so much for presenting to the community today. And thank you to Daniel. Oh, sorry. Can't see each other on a webinar. I don't know when you're going to talk. Thank you to Samuel for keeping an eye on those questions. That's always a fun job to do as well. So thank you, Samuel, for being with us today.
thank you too. You.
All right, so up next, we have a look at how to defend your Citrix castle. So those of you who've been around CUGC for a while are probably familiar with our next speaker, Patrick Coble. Whenever I hear Patrick speak, I always want to go run and hide. Just kidding, Patrick, not really. But he does talk about some very serious stuff sometimes, and he does see a lot of serious stuff. So I'm always glad to hear his insights, and I'm very excited to see what he talks about today. So Patrick is a leader of our Nashville CUGC group, and he is a CTP, and he gets around to a lot of our CUGC events. So you may have seen him at an Excel event or a local group meeting somewhere around the country. He does get around a lot. Before I hand things over to him, though, I do want to introduce James Rankin. James is also heavily involved with one of our CUGC groups over in the UK, and he is a CTP. And James is going to be taking a look at all the questions as you guys put them in. James, you want to say hello to the crowd?
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you very much for letting me sit in on a security webinar, because I spend all my days fighting with security guys about how they make everything that I put together unusable. I'm only joking, they do a job that needs to be done, but it's very interesting from my perspective to sit here and hopefully learn some things as well. So I am very much looking forward to it. It is very exciting. So if I want to hand over to Patrick to take it away, that would be cool, and just pop your questions in there and I will get them to him, hopefully at an opportune moment.
Yep, I think Patrick decided that he would like to take questions kind of throughout his presentation. So, you know, as you get them in, maybe save up 2 or 3 at a time, and we'll let him get through big chunks of his presentation. But yeah, he said he would like to take them throughout. So keep an eye on those for us. And with that, Patrick, I will send you the screen right now. Here it comes.
All right, hopefully everyone should see the screen.
I do.
Sweet. All right, cool. Well, today is a fun one. Most of you, just like you saw that, you've seen that before. Quick overview of me, so we can get into this thing. You know, a 386 DX was there. You know, saw the movies Hackers, started messing around with AOL and doing things. Got a job at a call center. Did MC CNA and MCSE prep course back in the day as a Nobel goodness. Joined the Marines, went to Iraq 2 times, did some computer security stuff there and other computer related things. Then I was a partner for a couple of years and I drew on whiteboards a lot. I think everyone understands that. And now I run around and do speeches and break into people's offices and Citrix deployments. So got 2 kids. I think everyone can read this. Most of y'all have seen I've spoken all over the place, and you know, still a rookie CTP 2018. Now we're into 2019. So I love computer security and EUC stuff. So this is our Citrix Castle. And this will be kind of a Castle 101 to begin with. This is a little bit different presentation than I've done before. It'll be more overview to begin with a lot of questions and stuff like that that's going to be asking of you for you to think about. It's basically kind of like a security audit for yourself for free. And then from there are some nerdy bits at the end and sprinkled between. But the most important part is to just think of this as defense in depth and how a castle has defense in depth. And we'll kind of kick this thing off. So the moats. Most good castles have a moat, and you know that makes that limits the places that someone can easily attack. It doesn't mean that there's not a ladder that can go across, or a boat, or other things that could get across the moat, but it makes it a lot harder to attack because there's less places to attack. And then you've got the walls and the ramparts. All right, so your defenses can line up here, and we're going to correlate all this to a real Citrix product. Then you have the castle turrets and watchtowers, right? It's the outposts so that your defense can see the approaching enemies and maybe be able to limit access further by taking them out before they get there. And then you have the drawbridge, further limits access for people to be able to get in easily, and during a battle, you can completely cut off access. And with Praveen and Scott, you know, we talked about Citrix Analytics and things like that, so that's kind of circle back around. Then you actually have the gatehouse, and the gate, the portcullis, is the last place to defend before someone breaches the perimeter. So there's lots of nuances to that. And then this is one that I had never known what a barbican is. And basically, it's the place between the entrance and the courtyard that they call the death trap. And if you can see in the center there, that is basically where everyone can line up and then just drop stuff and shoot stuff into anyone that comes in, because it funnels them all into that same place. And then the courtyard, right? If you're walking around the courtyard, you're most likely a trusted person in this castle at some level. And then you have the keep, which is where usually the leaders are going to be, but it's also the most defended inner building. And this is going to kind of how this stacks up. So Citrix Castle Design 101 is secure by design, right? So
we want to ensure that there's zero trust from external users is the normal approach. And then eventually, sometimes you'll go zero trust for all users. You're going to not trust anybody and only give them what you think they need to have access to, nothing more and nothing less. And you're going to lock it all down and open it up to groups who actually need it. So when we do security, and, I'm really excited to hear what Chris Rogers is going to do after this too, because I know that, and James was even saying before, is, us security guys always cause problems for everybody because we say, hey, you shouldn't allow them to do this, you shouldn't do that. And in some cases, you go too far, you can actually limit the user's ability to work, and that's a bad thing. And when we talk about defense in depth, right, there's lots of products to choose within the Citrix stack that can do it. And a lot of these products are also going to have overlap that are going to be able to protect you from multiple angles at the same time. So what is our moat in our Citrix castle? That would be your Citrix ADC is the most common, right? Now if you're a Citrix Cloud customer, then there's other things in play. But that's GeoIP, bad IP, and DOS protection, right? So if I can limit billions of IP addresses from even getting to my castle by blocking them with GeoIP, and then another million or two or more from bad IP, and I can also make sure someone can attack me very quickly, that is a very good defense to start off with. And Citrix Analytics overlays on this too, right? Because it's looking for those same feeds and same characteristics and risk indicators. And then you've got Citrix Access Control that's also doing something very similar to protect that outer edge of your castle. Then you got your walls, right? So this is still the Citrix ADC, Access Control, and Analytics, right? Because in this case, your walls are still defending you through your ADC or if you're a cloud customer. But then also when we talk about your watchtowers and turrets, this is where Citrix Access Control and Analytics can actually attack back. And we'll get into that a little bit too. And that is the biggest benefit for them, is that it's not a passive defense. It can actually take action and do things to help protect you even while you're asleep in your jammies. So the moat, right? This goes back to that ADC and GeoIP because in Analytics, and Citrix Policies, because if I can make sure that no one from this country, no one from these bad IP ranges, and anyone that does something shady is allowed in, I can completely cut off access to my Citrix deployment if it needed to be, right, to the castle. The gatehouse, the port, same thing. This is your Citrix Gateway. This is the very first step when you're allowing someone into your deployment. And those Citrix policies with session controls for copy paste and things like that, and your denial service protection, how many people are allowed to come through the gate at once, right? If you've got a VPX 200 or something like that, you don't need it to have 1,000 gigabits of throughput, right? And you would want to limit it based on the form factor for the license, along with making sure someone can't close your gate down by just knocking on the door too much. And Citrix Analytics and Access Control play into that. And then your Barbican, right? This is that last defense before they get to the Courtyard where all the fun things are. And this is microsegmentation, DMZ, and Windows Policies. This is what's really going to slow attackers down and ultimately have a whole lot of control once someone gets into your deployment. And then the Courtyard, right? Citrix Policies and Analytics are there too, right? Because Analytics is still in play because while someone's walking around your Citrix deployment and doing things, if they start doing unusual activities, then we can take action upon that. And then the keep. This is my goal as a hacker, right? To get domain admin credentials, to get access to a file share, to get access to an application during a penetration test. So this is your data, your file shares, your databases, your servers, and any other client information and things that go along with that. So this is where everyone wants to get to, and this is where, the big money starts coming in. And so if we want to look at this like a little better way that's not castle oriented, is everyone should have a firewall, hopefully, right? It's allowing external access, it's doing your natting, and it's doing level 1 through level 3. Then from there, you've got your Citrix ADC, our next layer of protection. This is defense in depth, right? There's not one solution that's going to make your deployment more secure, right? It's a multitude of solutions, especially solutions that work well together, right? And that you understand the flow. So when we've got our ADC, hopefully we're doing some GeoIP blocking, we're doing some bad IP blocking, we're doing some DOS protection, app QoE, and then we're doing web application firewall to limit things layer 4 through 7. So if I'm just allowing 443 open to some crazy web backend, it does not stop me from doing web attacks to that server unless I have some kind of web application firewall. The firewall that you're using to, delegate access externally is just making sure they come through port 443. It doesn't limit my attacks, right? And this is where lots of those things kind of come into play. And then we've got our Citrix Gateway with analytics, right? So we've got smart access, making sure people that are in this group have access externally and this group don't have access. We also have multi-factor authentication to make sure that someone has to have more than just a username and password, and with credential stuffing and harvesting going on and people using the same username and password for everything, for multiple sites, multiple things, it's a big deal. You want to make sure you have multi-factor, especially external access. We have single sign-on that's possible between there so that users may never even know the password that they're using to log on to these applications. And that's where Citrix Access Control can really shine too. And then anomalous access detection. Someone's coming from a different location, someone's doing something that's not been normal for that user coming from a location, we can go ahead and make a difference. Then you got Citrix Access Control, getting deeper into that, right? Website content control. Praveen already talked about that, and Scott too, right? So that we can make sure that people that go to whitelist, blacklist, or graylist sites, that they go to the secure browser. That way the ransomware infection stays there. It doesn't come down to your deployment. And then we have Sas Application Control, which I think is amazing. And there was a couple questions on this from the last session. And, the watermarking and controlling the data flow is incredible, because then I can give someone Salesforce, but they don't have access. They don't know their password. They don't know, they can't copy paste. It's watermarked. They can't save files. They can't upload files. We can control that completely. Whereas Salesforce on its own, just going to worldwideweb.salesforce.com, you can't control some of these things. So how you limit this is you tell Salesforce is the only way it can open this through these IP ranges, which are through your access control deployment. That way, someone can't just bypass all the cool things you're trying to do with the Citrix workspace for security and ease of use. You can make this all one happy family, right? And you can make sure no one can go around you. And now we're definitely getting ready to get our virtual desktop. So now it's up to the broker, the delivery controllers, the cloud connectors, things like that, our Citrix policies that control data copy, paste, all that. And then analytics is back again, right? We're looking for unusual data movement. We're looking for unusual activity within the session that we should maybe take action on. Now we're, all the way into that courtyard, right? How can we slow down things, right? Microsegmentation is a great way. ACLs, DMZs, ADMZs. Who can talk to who on each network? One thing that is a very common finding in, penetration tests is that once you're in any network in most deployments, you have access to every network in those deployments. There are no ACLs. There are no limitations between there. The only things that usually have limitations are things in the DMZ. Well, most Citrix deployments are not in the DMZ. The only thing that is in the DMZ is that Citrix Gateway, that Citrix ADC, as it hands off from external access to internal access, which is definitely a best practice. Martin, on the Citrix side, we've talked about this at a session earlier, is, secure by design means you might also have a double hop DMZ. Your Citrix deployment may be in its own ADMZ, completely separated, isolated, and controlled, and it might not have access to a domain controller. It might have access to ADFS federation, right, to further secure so that someone gets in, less and less to do. Most important thing now is once we're actually getting to that virtual desktop, what can we do to that on that virtual desktop? This is where those Windows policies are the most powerful way to control security of the user experience and what they can and cannot do. No run is one of my favorites. We'll get into that. Restrict drive, app locker, and much more, right? So the policies are very important. And then the virtual desktop and published application, AD group entitlements. Make sure that if someone's not in the group, they don't get access. Don't publish things to domain users. I've been to lots and lots of places, and very bad things can happen when you publish something to domain users in any VDI solution, even outside of Citrix. And then in the very center of this multi-layered bloomin' onion sandwich castle, however you want to look at it, for this defense in depth design is your data. That is the gold. That is what everyone is after, and that is what you need to protect. And if you don't want to be on the news and paying ransomware, Bitcoin ransoms, then you want to use these solutions. And Citrix has the most robust solution when it comes to all these. If you look at these things and you compare them to other solutions, many don't have over half these features. So Citrix is very, very, very secure because they are able to control things, and they have a product suite that's, in my opinion, very amazing. So, James, do we got any questions right now?
None so far, apart from a couple of things I was wondering about, but I'll save those till later for you.
Okay, cool. We are going to shake and bake. All right, so this is going to be more on each one of those layers. Just like I talked about, it's a little bit different presentation than normal. I want you to think about some of these questions. This is a free security audit that you're about to get with some common best practices and things I'm going to ask of you to think about for your environment. So firewall, right? You most likely have one externally. You're allowing only what needs to be open. You're using NATs in most cases, using public IP space externally for things, and having a public IP space assigned internally has been phased out. There's lots of security implications if it's not designed correctly. If there's been a lot of tests over the years that I've done that everything is just sitting on a public IP, and there might not even been firewall rules or anything done, and now you have a Windows box sitting on the internet, which hacker tip, don't do, because there's lots of things that can happen on there. Just Google Shodan, and you can have lots of fun there. But also, this comes back to what Chris is going to talk about later, is be nice. Open up port 80 so that it can redirect to 443. I go to a lot of places that go a little too far on security. Someone always has to remember to go to HTTPS ... right? We have a hardened Citrix ADC appliance, the Gateway, and we can open up port 80, and literally the only thing you can do is redirect to 443. Make it easy for the user so they can just type in your URL for your gateway and be able to move on with their lives. And if you don't have one internally, this is where that DMZ and ADMZ is basically where people are going to have another DMZ, another hop that we're controlling access inside and outside. And then, one thing that's is a great way to think about this is, should you have more than one for your critical business applications and segments? What we're talking about there is, should we have more different networks and segments and firewalls for critical applications? So if you're under any compliance, PCI, HIPAA, SOC, and many others in the banking industry and stuff like that, you want to make sure that those critical applications are on their own segment. You're controlling what goes in and out. Outside of maybe even the Citrix VDAs may also want to be on separate networks that are only allowed to talk to that network. Your business application is what's running your business, so you don't want to do that. So this Citrix ADC, right? So if you have an ADC, yay. If you don't, sad panda, right? And then depending on which version you have is going to determine what type of features you're going to be able to get when it comes to security, right? And there's more features than these four listed all the way on the premium/platinum side. But these are the big ones. These are the ones that can make the most impact and reduce the attack surface of your deployment. So, you've got an evil raccoon all the way to just, Caesar with the thumbs down, however far you want to go. So the three amigos of the Citrix ADC are bad IP, GeoIP, and AppQoE. So do you have GeoIP blocking enabled? Are you a US-based company or EU-based company that doesn't do work with other companies? If you do, you can reduce your attack surface by a couple billion IP addresses by just turning this on. It is not that hard. There's lots of wizards. There's lots of good documentation out there to do. If you're an international company, it can be a little more challenging, and you might not really be able to limit any of this. You might only just limit a country or two instead of just everything like this. So a lot of US-based companies, you can, only 1.5 billion IP addresses can ever access you, and you eliminate 2.7 billion. That's 64%. That's a great start. And this is just like we're talking about our castle. We're limiting access with our moat and our drawbridge of who could even get to the castle, let alone do anything once you get in there. And then you got to have Taylor Swift, right? Do you have bad IP reputation enabled? This can further reduce your attack surface by blocking millions of shady IP addresses from anonymizing websites, known bad culprits, and then you're going to help eliminate more and more things that come through there. This all comes through WebRoot, basically. The way to also think about GeoIP and bad IP is you're dropping it right at the ADC level. It's not coming in to be, give them a session or do anything. So you're saving a lot of processing power by dropping bad requests right off the bat instead of processing a bad request only to eliminate it further in our defense in depth design. So this is a way to also save CPU and RAM on your ADC is by dropping these things instead of processing them. And there's lots of attack benefits there too to help defend it. So on the ADC, app QoE is the next thing, right? Denial service and distributed denial services have grown and grown and grown, where we're getting to terabits per second when some state or country actor or activist group comes after your company. And so if we think about that, we need to have some rate limiting turned on to things. That there's only X amount of bandwidth to your internet. There's only X amount of bandwidth to the appliance. So use rate limiting to do that. And then once we've already blocked IP addresses based on countries or by bad IP association, we can also drop invalid packets. So if someone tries to do a SYN slow attack and many others, where they're sending us half a packet and we have to process it and realize, hey, I don't have the first packet, what's going on? Well, we're going to drop it right off the bat, so we're not processing it. There's lots of surge protection, send packets, what we already talked about, and then HTTP strict transport security, right? Making sure it's a valid HTTP HTTPS request instead of a partial one, which just wastes time and also allows someone to slow your deployment down. Then we got the application firewall, the web application firewall. One does not simply just turn on the WAF without testing it, right? It's very, very powerful, and there's lots of ways to do it with positive and negative and then hybrid modes, but it also can prevent zero-day attacks. If you have a homegrown application, it can be very easy to implement or very difficult depending on how it's coded. But it is the strongest way that you can defend your web applications that are going through your Citrix ADC. And so, the WAFinator, is the way to go. And basically, if you're a premium and higher, or you've bought the entitlement in the lower edition, you basically run through a wizard. And what I always recommend for anyone who wants to dabble in this is clone an existing VIP and then re-IP it. That way you cannot affect production traffic. You're the only one who knows about this new VIP, the .36. And you can test .36 and make sure it works, does it work, and how far you can go. And you're just going to run the wizard, and you're going to test and test and test and test. Basically, you name the application. You're going to specify if you're going to apply it, and right. So there's a nice true there. And then this is basically the screen that talks about the known bad things that are allowed or not allowed, and if we're going to block them, log them, or if it's even enabled. So you can see when we first start off and we apply web application firewall, everything's disabled, and all we're doing is we will block or log once it's enabled. And then you can see here is we can see credit cards. We can look for things like that. There's lots of SQL injection, cross-site scripting, and things like that we can turn on and off that are very common. So this is knowing bad techniques that are allowed and blocking those bad techniques. So it's a great way to do it. And so this one is one of those first poll questions here. Let's see, where was that thing?
I can run it for you.
Yep, I skipped the other one, but we'll just do the external access. So we just kind of ran through there.
That's okay. There you go.
Yep. So how many people actually use multi-factor for external access with your Citrix Gateway? I've seen it grow more and more, but then I see a lot of places that still don't have it. And, you know, it's one of the most difficult things for me as an attacker to overcome. And it's in some cases free or free-ish, or you might already own the entitlement depending on your Office 365 and Azure MFA and Duo.
I think
and
an
other
interesting fact, Patrick, maybe to make around MFA is we recently had a very public outage of Microsoft's MFA.
Yeah.
So I think it's also very important to think about resilience in your MFA around that, because we lost our Citrix Cloud environment for something like 14 hours around that, which wasn't a very good thing, unfortunately.
Yep. No, and this is where we go back to like Cloud 101 to James' point too, is making sure you have multiple providers, right? Not all eggs in one basket. And MFA is kind of the same thing. There's been some DNS outages and things like that has affected, you know, millions and millions of things. And when you are consuming someone else's microservice, application architecture, however you want to look at it, you're at the mercy of their outages and their best practices and what's going on. So you need to find a company that you trust. And in some cases, that might mean that you use two companies. So that was good. A majority of you are using MFA externally. That's great. And sometimes you can't enable it internally just because of workflow difficulties that can be created in there. But if you allow access to Citrix resources externally that also allow everything internally, make sure you've got a remote access group, and this goes back to zero trust. We shouldn't allow Citrix access externally for everyone just because, until we know that it needs to be that way. And that's a big thing there. And this VIP for your Citrix Gateway is a great one to enable bad IP, GeoIP, and AppQoE policies to help limit the attack possibilities on this very, very external IP address that's sitting out there on the internet. Do we got any questions yet there? Or is everybody just
I've had a couple of amusing comments from people for you, but saying that you should have had Joan Jett for your bad reputation image instead. And somebody who you must know called Chris Radka asking, how many ways can you skin a cat? So I'm assuming that's some sort of in-joke between yourselves. But apart from that, everybody seems to be just sitting and absorbing rather than chucking questions in there.
Great. Hopefully, my goal is hopefully everyone learns a little something. So we get to Citrix Analytics. I didn't go very deep because I knew Scott and Praveen were going to take care of this, but let's talk about it. Let's back up a little bit. Do you even have a SIM? It's a great product without a SIM, but with a SIM, its power is unmatched by any VDI vendor. There's no one that comes close to what Citrix Analytics and a SIM can do to defend your environment. And just like I'm saying right there, what I love about analytics is that it can defend you while you're not there, right? And take care of things that have happened during and after business hours. A lot of us in the IT world, we're very alert fatigued. We get alerts for all kinds of things, and adding one more set of alerts is really not going to help our lives in any way. And so if we can take action on bad things happening, instead of just trying to do an incident response process, which to that, normally when I've been brought in for incident responses in a Citrix deployment or VDI in general, is it's very difficult to even do an incident response because no one logs anything. No one has a syslog server set up on their Citrix ADCs. No one has any log retention on their PBS images for the virtual desktop or XenApp servers. So it can really help you to block something from bad from happening instead of trying to trace it down later. And Citrix Analytics is the guards for your Citrix Castle that are always up and always available to take action. They don't take lunch breaks like regular guards. And that's where I think its power really lies, is helping secure your environment beyond what you normally could have in the past. And when we talk about that, what are the risk indicators? What is Citrix Analytics looking for to go, hey, something looks bad? So when it comes to just Citrix virtual apps, the gateway, access control, endpoint management, and then content collaboration, which would be your share file stuff, it's looking for, hey, this is the first time someone has ever used that device. Now, are we going to block for the first time someone uses their device? Maybe not, but it's also about risk scores, right? And the metrics that are in there, right? Unusual application usage, data exfiltration, excessive file uploads and downloads, authorization failures, login failures, EPA scan failures, and then going to risky websites, attempting to access a known blacklisted URL on the access control. So basically, you've got all these 5 feeds that analytics is just chewing on all day long to look for something, a deviation, to find something that's not normal. And that's where I think, machine learning and AI and however you want to look at it, skip logic, if you want to go even just call it that, is very powerful for us to help do things that we don't have enough time to do in some cases, and do it better because they're going to be able to take action then. You can still stay asleep and it just, booted a user off there. And so what is Citrix Analytics, their hammer of compliance? These are the things, the global actions it can take, right? So it can notify you. Well, that's all cool. Just like we talked about alert fatigue, we might already be worn down a little bit. But then we talk about logging a user off. So as soon as someone is starting to do something shady, let's go ahead and log them off, because we want to make sure it's really them, make them authenticate again. And maybe when they come back in, let's start recording their session to see what in the world they're actually doing. We can boot the user off from the gateway within the session. We can disable the user to make sure no one can get in for like content collaboration if they're doing there. And if they're endpoint managed, we can also lock that device. And there's other things outside of this that can be taken to help make sure that when analytics thinks something bad's happened, the risk score has changed too much, or they have done something that is a definite no-no, you can go ahead and make sure that it's not going to happen anymore. So access control, they talked about that before too, right? This bolts on easily to your existing deployment and Citrix Analytics. And this, my favorite part about it is Sas applications and data leaks, is managing it in an SSO. You might be able to provide multi-factor authentication to a SaaS application that doesn't have multi-factor authentication because you use Citrix Access Control, and that's awesome. And you can also prevent printing, file downloads, and copy paste. And the website copy content control that it can do is also, so you can enable secure browser. So if anyone goes to somewhere they shouldn't, we can go ahead and make sure they're not going to that location on your browser, your Citrix session. It's actually going to an HTML5 session in the Citrix Cloud. They're doing their internet browsing from there. And this is also a cool way, depending on where you're going, with a Citrix secure browser on their own, is to reduce your internet-facing bandwidth, because the internet bandwidth is actually happening from the Citrix Cloud and not from yours. It's just a Citrix session at that point. So that part's good. Citrix Policies, these are the big 4. I've wrote a blog on this, and basically copy paste, drive mappings, and then all the drives. Most common finding in a security audit on the Citrix side is basically all these things are allowed, and even USB sometimes gets enabled, even though it's disabled by default, and it was for one user or one group, but it gets applied to everyone. Think about the jobs, the business use cases of people that use your deployment, and try to think, do they need this? Do they need USB devices? And kind of walk through that, right? There's a whole another blog that's all about how do you plan for your Citrix policies. It's on my CUGC also. So you guys can check that out and kind of dive into it. But, for me, when I think about the default settings, it's insecure right off the bat. That's why you can go ahead and use the secure template, the high security template that's built into Citrix XenApp and XenDesktop when you make your very first policy. people that have had existing Citrix deployments, it can be very difficult in some cases to go back and turn these things off because someone has had it forever. For anybody out there, it can be kind of a long journey to actually block all this stuff off, but it's going to be well worth it to make sure you know who can do things versus assuming everyone can. So Citrix Broker, most everyone uses AD groups to give that. And just like I've said before, don't publish anything to domain users. Use groups, use Active Directory. It doesn't cost you any more money to make one more AD group. And then hacker tip from there. Also, don't publish anything to privileged built-in accounts. So when I say that's administrators, domain admins, enterprise admins, and schema admins. What they leave behind is way too dangerous without proper isolation and control. That goes back to pass the hash, golden ticket, a lot of things like that. And many of the things I do, that's my whole goal, is to just get domain admin, because once I have domain admin, I own the whole domain. I own the whole network, every computer, every server I can control. And so if you're allowing a domain admin or enterprise admin or something like that to log on to a Citrix session that users are also logging into, a user that is not an administrator with a couple scripts ran, like called Mimikatz and Bloodhound and other things that you use to become a domain admin as an attacker, they become a domain admin because someone with that privileged account logged in. So don't do that. You do not need to be a domain admin to administer a Citrix deployment, right? Don't ever do that. And using good naming standards. This is another one. This helps you in Citrix Director for your help desk tools. It also helps you on the analytics side to figure out what someone should or should not be able to do based on that. And, it's also easier to audit, and it's a lot there. So these are kind of basic examples, right? So CTX is our prefix, app, DSK for desktop, or however you want to do it, that tells you what the application is. You can nest accounts into there, right? So if HR is the one that needs Notepad, put the HR group inside that Notepad group. And that way you know who has access with there. And then who has external access. Make a policy one. Make a policy one that allows printing. Make a policy one that allows USB. And only those people, users or groups, will go into those. And it's also a very, very good way, if you get down to this granularity and you're not using domain users, that you can also use those exact same groups to apply to the NTFS permissions on the OS. So say finance, right? They're using Great Plains for accounting. Use that one Great Plains group to publish that application, and then use that same Great Plains group under C program files Great Plains. And make sure that no one except people that are in finance can even navigate to that executable to even do things. So use the groups you have, and don't forget about NTFS. A wandering user is a dangerous thing on a Citrix server, especially in the XenApp world and even the XenDesktop world. So,
I've got a quick question about logging.
Yes,
I think it's come from Tobias, actually. If you have an HA pair, will the logs go to both nodes or just the primary? I'm assuming he's talking about an HA pair of your actual logging servers, I presume.
Yep. So it depends on what logging solution you use, right? Most things are separated into like three categories, like your SIM, which is your data collector aggregator, which depending on its design and HA and synchronous writes and asynchronous writes, you may have 2 or 3 copies of each log entry to make sure that if something happened, you've always got a copy of the log. And then you've got things like syslog, which normally only goes to one source, right? One IP address that you point it to for your Citrix ADC and other Linux-y things, ESX servers, all those. So in many cases, depending on what that solution is, that may only be one server, or it may be a group of servers too with shadow copies and other things. And then you have Windows Event Logging. Windows Event Logging is controlled by policy and can go to multiple sources and do all kinds of things there. And then all syslog and Windows Event Log still should feed into your SIM, so you have total aggregation and visibility in there. So depending on which type of logging we're talking about, most likely it's able to go to one source natively, or it can go to multiple sources natively, or it has to be a configuration of that. So you got like Logarithm and Splunk and things like that. There's lots of HA ways to do that. And if you put the Splunk forwarding agent on all your servers, then it's going to forward it along, and it can be written in multiple locations to make sure when it's time for incident response, you have things that you can correlate. So hopefully that helps, Tobias. And those are the three main types of logging that I see all over the place. Cool. All right. So microsegmentation, ACLs, and DMZs. You know, should all your VDAs be able to talk to each other? In most cases, no. In desktop 1 should not be able to talk to desktop 2. There's no reason for that. Everyone still has client-server applications that ET phone home to the mothership. And then should those VDAs have full network access? This is one of the things we talked about earlier. Is most networks have access to all the networks. And so that means that VDA can talk to the domain controllers, every database server, every file server, every application server, every workstation in your deployment, and then all other servers. It can be very dangerous. You know, in the active world, it's called pivoting. It means that I can pivot from just one little Citrix session or one there and get to everything. And so another thing that's another common finding is that VDAs, XenApp or XenDesktop, whichever way you want to look at it, have full internet access. There's no content filtering. Sometimes when people make their PBS VLAN in a PBS or on their desktop VLANs, even using MCS, they are on a server network. The server network is not a desktop network. So the content control might not be on there at all. So there could be unfettered internet access, which usually works great for me because I can download all the tools and viruses that I need to do my job from the internet, because I can go ahead and, number one, get to Tor's website, number two, install Tor, number three, go to the marketplaces, number four, install bad things from the marketplaces and other open source websites, and then execute those and then get my tests and do things like that, right? So do they need full internet access? There's a lot of applications out there that do not. And I would highly advise just thinking about it for your environment. And so, just like I said, most of my audits, VDI VLANs have all the access. Windows policies, right? This is my top 10. Obviously, there's a lot more. But remove run, CMD, and PowerShell access with AppLocker are the most important things you can do. Run is the most powerful single group policy you can do to slow down an attacker or mitigate an attack. Removing command and PowerShell access means I can't execute things, especially if it's done correctly. It means I have to do a lot of crazy things with Windows macros and other things to do that. And even some of those can be reduced with Microsoft Defender's Attack Surface Reduction tool, ASR. Restricting all drives. No one should be able to see your right cache drive and go click around and see the C drive and see this. If any of you are Oracle places, you know, your TNS names is a very dangerous thing to be just leaving on a file share in a temp directory. So make sure people can't just go browse around on there, right? Having access to their user profile, their documents, folder redirection, user profile manager, all those things, those are all good, but they shouldn't just be able to go willy-nilly around there. Restricting help programs. This is the number one way that we do jailbreaks and break into that. We'll kind of go over there. AppLocker, all those things. Remove the internet, black hole proxies. Remove unnecessary items in the start menu in desktop. We don't need Candy Crush on there, right? And Minecraft. So let's clean that down. Lock down the file explorer, remove map drives. Only map drives for users. You should know what those users need for a map drive. Don't allow them to map drives. That's exactly how lots of things can proliferate when it talks about ransomware and going along there. And then remove, control panel and other things. And then restrict application execution to only known goods, which is a very long process, but it's still very important. Optimization. Make sure you're optimizing your master image. And also, if you're using like BISP, you can optimize every single time you seal the image. Highly, highly, highly recommended because it can also help secure your deployment. We're turning off services, we're removing shortcuts, we're removing things for people to be able to access. So it can help, and it also can speed up your login times. I know, James, you've done a lot of blogging on awesome login times, and I'm also always jelly when I see some of your blogs come out and tweets of these incredibly low login times. And a lot of it has to do with optimizations and policies and thinking about it. So optimize your image for sure. So application whitelisting and blacklisting. This is, I think, one of the poll questions here. Did we, yeah, do you use AppLocker, Bloop? Let's see. Ooh, look, maybe I can do it. I don't know. All right. But does anyone even use AppLocker in this group, right? Now, AppLocker can also be configured and controlled within Wim. So you're going to be able to get a lot of cool stuff there. And then you got like Policy Pack and other, Citrix user group sponsors that can do some very awesome security related things. And then most antiviruses can also do this. If we're deploying EMR X banking application Y, the only thing that should be able to run by that user is those two applications. You should not just allow any executable to be ran. There's lots of cool ways to do this. Yep, so that's kind of what I see. So we're at 85% know that anyone's preventing things from executing. This is I would say it's the poor man's antivirus. If you don't have money for fancy antiviruses and SIMs and all these other whiz-bang security things, especially people that are in like the university, higher education, and local state government where budget's very tough, or small, medium businesses, application whitelisting and blacklisting is the best bang for your buck. Because if I'm only going to allow applications that have this SHA, this MD5 fingerprint, or this exe name, or this path, or this to run, if someone downloads virus X executable, it cannot execute, right? It is one of the best ways to prevent ransomware and other malicious things from happening by eliminating it. Does that mean that it's infallible? No, it's not bulletproof, right? No security thing really is, right? And it's always going to be always changing, right? So there's ways to bypass even AppLocker in certain situations. But I'd rather that be a more advanced way. A more advanced attacker would be needed to break into your environment versus a very novice person. So where do we start, right? When we go down this road, level 0 is just setting up audit-only policies, right, for exe installer scripts and packages. And all this is going to do is put stuff in the Windows event log that says, hey, I saw someone launch this. Hey, I saw someone launch this. Well, you can take that log and you can start building what your list needs to be. So you're like, okay, well, they're using NextGen. They're using the IBM client. They're using this. Let's go ahead and limit those. First one is to definitely do admin applications. PowerShell is the first one. It's kind of the only way you can prevent it very easily, and other admin tools that can do there. LOL bins, they're pretty funny, and basically those are ways that you can use good applications for bad things. We'll talk about that in just a second. And then your main applications, this is that long process. It's step by step. We're only going to allow good things. And everything else. This is just like your any rule that's at the bottom of a firewall. It takes a long time to remove that very bottom one. And some people, it's never their goal, right? The any just sits there the whole time. So it's like we talked about, everything can be in audit-only mode, which means it's not going to start blocking applications. I would highly recommend that you do Windows event log forwarding so that you can actually see this, or just do it on one machine. Don't try to do this in some huge deployment. Just do this on one machine. You can make a group policy that just applies to this one. And then you can walk through these little wizards and basically, within about 5 or 6 clicks per exe, you can allow that. One thing I would say is advise you is to be careful when you trust a whole publisher like Microsoft, right? Because that's where those LOL bins will strike. So you want to be very specific with paths and file hashes instead of using publisher. So if you got Wim, it's built in. If anything, it's probably an easier console to understand, and you can still do what we're talking about, audit only. We don't want to block anything yet. And it also can do DLLs, which are also kind of the bad thing there. So what's a LOL bin? It's called Living Off the Land. And basically it is the backpacker's guide to hacking on any system. I can take a good file and do bad things with it that are part of that. And if you want to look at the LOL BOS project, Advar Mo, he is a MVP on the security side and does amazing things. Lots of great presentations on this. He's been at the forefront of this, and he runs something that actually makes a huge impact to a lot of people. But you can execute codes, you can compile code, you can do file operations, you can browse the internet from EXEs. And it's kind of funny that, like, say this one, Program Compatibility Assistant, right? With that one, I can use it to launch an EXE that you may have blocked, right? I can use it to also target specific DLLs to upload payloads into the deployment. I can also use it to open up Control Panel, right? Because it's a trusted Windows file, right? But should a user be launching Program Compatibility Assistant? I don't think so, right? This is the list of the main LOL bins that are out there. And so you can see some of these are going to be very familiar to you, right? PowerShell, you can literally do anything with it, right? Especially Windows operating system. But let's think about print. How in the world can print do other things other than print? Well, because it's a file and it's a web protocol. So you can do lots of cool things with it. Now, some of these, obviously, Explorer EXE, you can't prevent that from executing, right? But what we need to know is that Explorer EXE can do other things outside of just showing you the UI in your Windows file system. But no one should be running BitsAdmin or the CertUtil or WScript or CScript, right? No one should be messing with the disk service. So there's lots of these that you can easily turn off and no one will ever notice, right?
Yeah.
Everything we're talking about.
Change the proxy server with BitsAdmin. I found out the other day, which I was amazed to find out.
That's right. Yep. And so this is, a slow process, but you're going to apply this policy only to your users. You're going to need these EXEs in some cases to do your job, right? Especially we talk about like RoboCopy or something like that. You got provisioning server and you're syncing up those shares. So there's going to be things that you are going to deny to yourself. And most of the time when I talk about doing Citrix policies for any deployment, those Microsoft policies, is make sure you deny your Citrix admin group or your help desk group or other groups that need administrative or more privileged access so that they can run these things, especially when you talk about like MS config, when you need to just take a quick look at the system and some of the high level things. So permissions, just like we talked about, open share permissions. This is how bad things spread around. This is how worms and malware do their thing. And then so make sure you understand that there's the file share and then there's the NTFS permissions, right? And think about all the file shares that any VDA has access to on your deployment. And are they all secure? Are they all SMB3 or higher, right? Sometimes a quick scan, you can find some amazing old SMB shares, could even be admin shares that you lowered administrators to everyone for that one time you were working with Susie in finance that you needed to copy stuff up to it, and then you never turn that permission off. I've seen permissions that have been set incorrectly for 10, 15, 20 years doing audits, right? And so think about that and kind of go through that. So app jailbreaking. I know this isn't an iPhone or an Android device.
Sorry, Patrick, just before I go, I've got a couple of quick questions probably around the section that we've just covered. First one is one that I was thinking about myself is if you're being very restrictive with app locker, and especially if you're using hashes, does that require a lot of maintenance, a lot of overhead? And for instance, if you're getting lots of app updates, such as Chrome updating automatically, you'll have to be updating that whitelist quite a lot.
That's right, yeah. It can definitely change your operational burden. So if you have an application that updates on a very, very regular basis, right? I'm talking like monthly, and Chrome is a great example. That's where you might just do file path for it instead of hash. It does mean that if someone was able to get administrative access and was able to make something called chrome.exe, even though it's bad.exe, they would be able to execute it. And that's a way that things get bypassed. But yeah, if you have applications that are constantly changing and that hash is going to constantly change, then hash is not recommended for that. Using path is. Are there ways to work around it? Yes. There's ways to work around almost any IT security control, but we want to make it as difficult as possible for the attacker while we can still make it good for the user, which is always relative to.
Yeah, there's that thing AppSense used to have with Application Manager as well that let you just specify a specific owner, which then would cover you for updates. But just quickly, for the looking at the time, Daryl's asked a question: if you're disabling Run and CMD and PowerShell, why would you need to whitelist anything? Which is an interesting enough question, I guess.
If you're going to disable those things, why do you need to whitelist anything else?
Yep, that's the question. As I say, if you can't launch anything, why would you need to block them?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's because I'd still be able to launch any other exe on the system if I didn't have like no run enabled, right? If I still have run enabled on a computer, then I can type in the full path into an Explorer window unless I've prevented that and still execute things even without command or PowerShell, because what's doing the execution is explorer.exe, right? The GUI, right? So you can still do that. So yeah, you want to eliminate those administrative applications, because there's also a lot of things when we talk about bad applications where you can actually launch all kinds of interesting things from Microsoft Word, like using a command called DDE auto. And it's a way you can make a malicious package that someone can double click on and the Microsoft Office will come up and they click it and now it tries to launch PowerShell. Well, if you don't have PowerShell enabled, then they can't do that. So yeah, it's a great starting point, but it's not the finishing point, right? You want to do more than everything else, because other things can still execute other things, right? Especially we talk about those LOL bins.
Cool. That's all I've got for the moment.
Cool. All right. So what we talked about with kind of application jailbreaking is this is a way that you can get around most any policies, most deployments. It's the number one thing that I run into. And that's kind of how it works, right? So this is next gen EMR. You just go to File, About, and then you can click on the next gen URL and you can get to the internet. And you weren't ever supposed to be able to get to the internet from next gen, right? And then, that's when I'm talking about unfiltered internet access. That's when that causes a problem. Then we talk about something even like benign, like remote scan. So many applications have a link to their website so that they can service things. And you can click on that URL and it will spawn there. So File, Help, About, and Help About is the best way to get out of any application. And this is where whitelisting comes in. Should someone be able to execute these things? Then you can get back to there. So banking application, IBM iSeries, very, very popular in the banking world as a 3270 emulator. We go File, Open. It prevents it by not allowing us to pick any files. It's only allowing us to pick profile files for it. Okay, well, how about I go and do File or Edit Preferences and I go Add a button? Well, now I can just say, hey, I want to go to this URL, right? Bam, I made myself a shortcut on my banking application, and now I'm browsing the internet. So jailbreaking is something that is, without proper application whitelisting and blacklisting, is a huge problem. And this is where restricting help from opening Internet Explorer, Chrome, Firefox, Command, PowerShell, other things that are out there is very, very important. Just kind of the last two slides here as we wrap up. What are the most dangerous applications? The browser. You have the browser published in your deployment. It is the most dangerous application you can have. It is the entry point for basically everybody phishing attacks, which if you know anything about phishing, it's a whole lot easier for me to do a phishing campaign and more successful than me trying to hack the planet and use a vulnerability and exploit to get in. So it's very, very important. If you don't need internet access on application X server, then proxy it to the local host. So 127.0.0.1. That's called the black hole. So that means no internet or intranet access is possible on that server once you've done that. Now, if you're a non-admin or if you're an admin, it can still be possible, right? Firewalls, other proxy setups that you can do to make sure. Your next most dangerous application is your mail client. This is where that phishing email comes in. This is where it is clicked. This is where those macros are launched that bad things are in. And this is where, I'm talking about attack surface redirection. And make sure, if you're publishing Microsoft Office, you've got Outlook in there and that's your mail client, make sure you have those ADMXs installed and put on your group policy, because they can control some great things to make sure it's secure. So you're always one click away from a bad incident from your mail client in your internet browser. So think about those and control those. So as I wrap up, why no blogs in a while? It's because I've been working on a book, the VDI Lockdown Guide, and that's hopefully going to come out right before Synergy. So I'm working on that. And James, do we got any questions or anything on there?
No more questions come in, but I'm just going to say you've made me feel awful now, because I've got all these security things in my head and I'm in the middle of a Citrix cloud deployment. I think that maybe a question that comes from myself really is, it's very hard to strike the balance between, as you said, security and usability. So, some part of me seems to think that, you should allow some things through in the name of usability and then concentrate a bit more on detecting what.
Totally. Yeah, no, I mean, you definitely want to, this is where like Citrix Analytics and things like that may be the easier way for you to focus on those unusual activities more than anything else, because it's a long road to get to some of those things to work.
Did we lose James for a minute? I think we might have lost him.
Yep, I think we did. I think the security people came over and they've chopped his internet down. Yeah, no, it's a balance. And for everyone listening still out there in the world, what I would say is, baby steps, setting up some simple policies just for one server, for one user, and go through this. This can be a whole lot. Some of your brains may be exploding with this much stuff. And maybe you just did this internal security audit that we basically did together with all 118 of you. But don't be discouraged. You can chip away at this in a very good way. So if there's not anything else, we'll go ahead and get ready for Chris. And James, thanks so much for doing everything and fielding the questions. And I hope everybody learned a little bit. And I will talk to you all soon.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, James, if you're still out there. So I did put in the chat window for you guys that if you're going to be in Kansas City, Missouri, Patrick will be live and in person on April 4th at the CUGC XL and Great Plains. So I'll put a link out there if you have any way to catch him. It's always great. So definitely check that out. And all right, so thank you, Patrick, thank you, James.
Sorry, I got
great.
Cut off my internet.
There you are.
All the time and bits. So I don't know whether you even heard my question or got a chance to answer it. But sorry about that. My dodgy internet has finally done me for the first time in a live webinar.
No problem. We got it, and Patrick answered it. So thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right, so next up we have Chris Rogers. Chris is a leader of our DC CUGC group, and he is a CTP, and he is going to talk to us about what happens when security goes wrong, because you always have to have a balance. And I do like to point out he is on Twitter as Citrix Jedi, so I'm going to make a super cheesy joke and say that Chris is going to show us how to find the balance in the Force, right? Well, before I hand things over to you, Chris, I want to introduce Tobias Kreidel. Tobias is going to keep an eye on the question box for us throughout this next session. Tobias is the Vice President of our steering committee. He is a CTP, and he is also a leader of our CUGC content working group, which is a small group of folks that you may or may not know a lot about, but we meet monthly to talk about things like this webinar, what shows up on the CUGC website, on the blogs, everything that you find online. So Tobias, you want to say hello to everyone?
Hello, everyone. This is Tobias, and just as an aside, a little tidbit of information. Chris and I both have the interesting commonality that we started out our careers in astronomy.
I didn't know that.
Yep. Genuine rocket scientists.
All right, this should be good.
All right, well, I'll hand it back over, and yeah, folks, keep those questions coming. And one quick question for you, Chris: would you prefer to be interrupted when questions of relevance come in conjunction with the topic that you're currently on, or would you prefer waiting till the end?
I like interactivity. I encourage anyone listening to ask questions, share anecdotes, whatever you want to do, and make this a lively and interactive session, because basically you got me up here pontificating at you for an hour, and let's break that up a little bit. So.
All right, excellent, folks. Well, you heard it from the man himself, so don't be shy.
All right, put that up there. And thank you, Google. Got it, whatever. Okay, good. So I'm actually going to segue a little bit from what Patrick was just talking about, because it's interesting, hearing some of the synergies between, one talk and the next and things like that. And there's an awful lot of things that I'm going to say that are going to ring a chord with some of the things that Patrick said. But I'm gonna put a security vulnerability number 3 to his list. And that number 3 is USB keys, because I was in a conversation just last week where I learned a new term. And if you're in security, if you're in any IT, you have to always be learning and always make sure you are not the expert on anything, always learn. So the term I learned last week was parking lot seating. And I did not know this was a thing. It didn't really occur to me because it's not something that I'd ever do. Of why would you ever pick up a USB key you find in a parking lot and put it in your computer? That's a thing. It's an attack vector. Hackers, corporate espionage hackers, don't ask me how the conversation I had in context with this, but corporate espionage hackers go out and they get USB keys, they print them with company logos, they seed the parking lots, and takes the conversation I had about 10 minutes for a malicious program to be loaded up onto a company system, and they're in. So
and you make sure and Chris, you always make sure you label it something cool like payroll export, Amex export, stuff like that. And it really grabs it, and you can rubber duckies and all kinds of fun things happen there. That's awesome.
Totally. Yep. So I did not know that was a thing. So I learned something last week. But we're here to talk about when security goes wrong. Now, as Tobias said, I come from an astronomy background. I worked for NASA for a little while, and this was back, and I'll date myself, and Tobias can certainly appreciate this. This was back in the days when the internet was new. This is back for me in the early 90s, and I sort of was on the tail end of the ARPANET thing. I'm sure Tobias has plenty of stories about the ARPANET. But that's back before security, really. It was an open and available system, and it was academic, and everyone had access to everything, and security was not a thing. Didn't need to be. Well, then .com started hitting, and you started to have companies on the internet, you started to have financial information on the internet, and now security has to be a thing. Well, the difficulty ends up, and the title of when I was thinking about doing a presentation and thinking about the title, it's like, we can talk about all this wonderful security stuff, but at some point, security goes wrong. Security goes too far. Security just completely falls off the cliff as far as common sense. So what I'm hoping to do here is to pull you guys back a little bit and give some of that common sense. So we will get going. We already introduced Tobias, we already introduced myself. And so when I say security is not wrong, security is great. Of course. Well, okay, fine. I'll totally understand. If you think I'm just completely, off base when I say security is wrong, I'll completely understand. So, but yeah, security is the way and the light of all things, right? Right? Nah. Okay. bear with me and we will get there. So there is one who is prophesied to bring balance to IT security. Who is it? I bet those of you that know me think I'm about to say Citrix, right? Totally bet that. No, there's really nobody. It sounded good though, so which is why I laughed when Stephanie said something. It's like, I totally have a slide that says exactly that. So, but there is balance. As Stephanie said, there is a balance to be struck. So what does that balance look like? So I present to you the triangle of IT security wisdom. And we're all used to the normal triangles we see, faster, better, cheaper, that kind of thing. Well, okay, so what does our security triangle look like? Our security triangle has security as the pinnacle, obviously. It also has cost in there, security costs. The people that do your security costs, the infrastructure that you put in place, that costs, everything has a cost associated. But also, and dovetailing from previous talks, there is usability. So where are you on this triangle? Well, pick two, right? You can't have all three, pick two. Nope, not in this case. Right there is where you want to be. You want to strike the balance. You want to find security, you want to find usability, and you want to find cost. Now, if you particularly want to be over here on this side where you don't care about cost, but you care about security and usability, and you have a big old budget, far be it from me to tell you otherwise. Maybe, and it does happen, maybe you are a federal agency, that's a lot of who I deal with, that just got hauled up in front of Congress because you had a breach. And maybe all of a sudden your budget looks really, really good for security. By all means, spend it. Get the experts, get the equipment, get the things that you want to get, and make your security as strong as you want it to be. But again, still, remember, there is a balance. So yeah, if you all of a sudden find yourself with a big old budget, you know what? You don't need me. You just go spend it and have that. But you know what? Most people I hope I'm talking to right now have a limited budget. You have an annual budget on IT, you have an annual budget on security. Maybe it's not even a line item. Maybe it's something that's just a secondary thought.
Chris?
Yes, sir.
Let me just interject. A really valid point here, I think, is even if you are one of the very fortunate folks out there with deep pockets, it still does not necessarily mean that you are making a wise investment in the technology. You have to pick the right technology for your environment.
My absolute favorite Super Bowl commercial of all time, I will attribute to IBM. Although, the Game of Thrones commercial with the Bud Knight, the last one, that was pretty darn good. But I will attribute the best one to IBM, where you have the king and his knights sitting at a round table. And one of the knights looks at the king and says, "There is great consternation in the kingdom. There is a mighty dragon that is terrorizing our citizens. What do we do about it?" The king looks, he says, "Consultant Ned, what should we do about this problem?" And Consultant Ned looks very, very sternly and very thoughtfully and says, "We must build a mighty catapult." "Oh, I see. What shall we put in the catapult?" And Consultant Ned motions to the other side of the room, and this giant bag of gold and jewels and things gets heaped upon the table. And the king just looks and goes, "Are you suggesting we throw money at the problem?" Yeah, that's exactly what he's suggesting. So that's another thing to be careful of, and a very valid point. You want to be very cautious about simply throwing money at the problem. Again, and this is the whole underlying theme that I'm going to have through the entire time, is common sense. Make a really, really good thought about what it is you're going to be doing, because there's the balance to be struck. You have usability, you have users, get used to it. Users are, again, kind of coming back to Patrick there, users are your biggest vulnerability. They just are. There's just not a way around that. If people are going to be using the system, you have social engineering, you have all the click here because you'll get $6 million from the prince in Nigeria, and okay, well then you're done. But you have users. How do you protect the users from themselves, but also how do you maintain that sense of security that your organization needs, okay? So, but here's a real point to underscore. There's no such thing as 100%. You can get there. The more money you throw at the problem, the closer you're going to get to 100%, but it is diminishing returns. You will never get to 100% because a determined attacker will find a way. Always, always does. It's just never a question. A determined attacker will find a way. Well, there is a way. You know, if you don't have a system, just cut the cord, yank it out. Okay, now it's a secure system. Well, not really. Someone could come in and steal it and pick it up, and off you go. Ask Mega Upload that one. I'm actually I live in Northern Virginia, and the provider for Mega Upload I'm friends with, and he said one day the FBI came in and they just said which ones are their servers, and they picked up the servers and they left. That was it. Okay, that they're the FBI, they can do that, but that's the reality of what could happen. Someone comes in, picks up your servers, and you're done. Amusing end to that story is several weeks later, those same servers showed up on their doorstep. Just, they were done with them. They dropped them off one day. So then we will go into the meat and potatoes of the conversation, which is my top 5 list of security do's and don'ts. And if Melissa Case happens to be watching or happens to be seeing the recording or stuff like that, I actually did go and look up the proper punctuation and grammatical usage of the phrase do's and don'ts. And where I have the apostrophes is correct. So I did my research. All right, with examples. So as I said before, feel free to interrupt with your own stories, with your own examples. I'm going to give my perspective. I'm going to give my experience with a lot of this stuff. And again, I'm going to talk about, per the subject, when security goes wrong. You know, because I have lots of examples of those extremes of when someone thinks they're secure, when someone tries to do something secure, but they fall flat on their face. So we're gonna go with this. So number 1, change control. Everybody has a change control process. I hope everybody has a change control process. Do it. Just do it. Do your change control. Do your due diligence. Whenever you make a change to a production system, please, 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 please have someone other than you have a look at it. Even if it's just, you know, a colleague or someone like that, does this look sane? Now, opposite side of that, don't make it so long that your users and sysadmins find ways around it. I am thinking of one particular federal agency here. And like I said, I'm going to share an awful lot of my experience with the general idea of making you roll your eyes a little bit, but hopefully also opening your eyes a little bit to how things can go wrong in extreme circumstances. And this is definitely one. So a certain federal agency, you're familiar with them. I'm not going to name names, but you trust me, you are very familiar with this one. You probably, given the audience I'm talking to, interact with them almost every day. This particular agency, as most agencies do, outsources a lot of their IT management. Well, let's just say that contractor was not necessarily as well oversighted as they should have been, and started making changes to the environment. And at one point made just one too many changes to the environment when not knowing what they were doing, and brought everything down. You know, hardcore, all hands on deck, bring everything back up. What did you change? Figure it out, get it back up and running. At which point, as reactionary usually is, said federal agency came in and said, we need a change control process. The process they put in place takes over a month to make a change. They have 2 different change control boards. You have to pass one and then the other. You have to submit it a week before, such that it gets vetted by someone before it hits one change control board. That change control board vets it, it sends it to the final change control board that approves it, and then it gets executed. Here's the fun part. the change that gets executed does not get executed by the person that submitted the change. As part of your change, you have to submit detailed step-by-step instructions of every single thing that needs to be done, command line, mouse clicks, whatever needs to be done, and then someone else will execute that procedure, whether they know the system or not. In my case, it's a NetScaler, and I submit command lines and things like that to be able to do that. And if the person makes a mistake, if the person doesn't know what they're doing and gets an error message, rather than having me there to be able to say, oh yeah, that's not a big deal, don't worry about that. If they get a single error message, they back out the procedure, kick it back and say, do it again. At which point you're another month waiting for your change control. So this is an example of an extreme process that hobbles the agency, frustrates the admins, and just doesn't ever allow anything to get done. So yeah, do change control, but just do it smart. Don't make it such that it's going to just completely kill the ability to do anything in your agency. All right,
Chris,
yes,
just a little bit of feedback. The audience is really enjoying your stories, and there's not much that can beat, the creativeness when you have real life scenarios to talk about. And let me just say one other quick thing, namely, one really important aspect of change management, which, by the way, we and many other places have, is to also very seriously consider having a development QA environment in which enough people have the ability to beat on this thing to ascertain whether things are really as good as they should be, even before those changes are submitted to the appropriate change management board.
That is yet another punchline to this particular agency. There was no dev and test environment. You could not test your changes before someone else tried to implement them in production.
Ouch.
Yeah. Ouch. Yeah. Now, I will say, kind of, filling in the blanks on there between the do's and the don'ts. I was at another company, this is a financial company, and their change control process was really, really good. They had a dev, test, and production environment, and they actually had 3 sets of NetScalers that the actual NetScaler engineers would do the changes in the dev environment. And what I came in to do, I wrote a Perl script that would go in and would munge the configuration files, change them from dev to QA to production. They had standard naming schemas that a Perl script would handle. And we would check the configurations into Subversion and then check them out into QA. The changes would be validated in QA and then would be pushed into production. So the changes were done by qualified people, but then the button was actually pushed by someone else. So you had, number one, you had separation of privileges. You had an expert looking at and validating the configuration. And you had changes that would go through in a matter of days, fully validated, fully tested. So that was a really, really good example of a good way to do it. Now, making that Perl script was kind of a bear, but it's definitely one of those things I always look back on my career and go, you know what, that was a really good thing I did. So, all right, do's and don'ts, certificates and encryption.
Chris,
yes, sir.
Couple questions. Okay, one is, are these SAML SSO templates going to be available to on-prem gateways in the future? The current configuration is a bit tricky.
No. Really?
Oh, I think that's from the access control questions, Tobias.
What, back from Patrick's?
Oh, I'm sorry. My bad. My bad. My scroll bar went up too far. Never mind. Just ignore me. Ignore that man behind the curtain.
I was wondering what the context was, but yeah, that's fine. No, yes. See, SAML and single sign-on is tricky. Yes, it is. Okay. Certificates encryption. Do you use SANS certificates? Does anyone please tell me? Does anyone use wildcards? Just don't use wildcards. Another favorite of mine, a large financial company. Again, this is a financial company that all of you touch, all of you have. It's responsible for safeguarding your funds, basically. And they have a single wildcard certificate facing everything that they do out on the internet. And just, like, please don't do that, because if that one key, if that one certificate were to get compromised, you're done. So do use SAN certificates when you have GSLB is a thing that I do very frequently, and there are at least 2, maybe 3, 4 entry points with 2 or 3 different names at each entry point, and SAN certificates are an absolute must. So if you don't know what subject alternative names are, please do go find that out and start using SAN certificates. NetScalers support them, highly recommend them. Do you use TLS 1.2? 1.3, anyone? Anyone actually using it? NetScaler supports it, but it's not necessarily widely adopted yet. The standard just came out, I think, a year, maybe 2 ago. Finally, after being in review for a very long time. But yeah, there's just no reason whatsoever to use anything less than TLS 1.2 anymore. Yeah. A lot of people will come back and say, oh, but backward compatibility. Oh, it's okay. I'm sorry. If you're still using Windows XP, just stop, please stop. I'm looking at you, airline industry, who, when we walk through airports, we look and we see blue screens from Windows XP on all your displays. Yeah, don't use SSLV anything. Just don't. And again, here's a complaint I have of Citrix, of the NetScaler team. I've had this complaint for years. Many of us have had this complaint for years. Please turn off SSL v3 by default. There's no reason to have it on anymore. And anyone on that side of the house will say, oh, but it's for compatibility. No, stop it. Do you use AES-based SHA-256 high-bit ciphers? And don't use anything else. If you look at the cipher lists inside of a NetScaler, you see the default list, which still contains some SSL v3 stuff. You look at even the FIPS list that contains things like CBC ciphers. Fortunately, they don't contain RC4 ciphers anymore. I won't get into the possible exploits around CBC ciphers versus maybe you will and maybe you won't. And there's certain attacks that will happen, things like, just don't use them. Just it's one of those things. My standard cipher list for a NetScaler, if I include 128-bit ciphers, it's 12 ciphers long. If I don't include them, it's 6 ciphers long. And I don't really have a problem with, most modern browsers, most modern applications work just fine with that. So do take a look at those cipher sets and whittle them down, because there should be no reason whatsoever you're using insecure ciphers. All right, do's and don'ts, the third. Authentication, authorization, and auditing. Oh my! So those of you familiar with a NetScaler will be familiar with this term, AAA. And what does it mean? Well, it means exactly what it says. Authentication, who are you? Authorization, what do you have access to? Auditing, what did you do? And you absolutely want to make sure that these 3 things are always in place. Always authenticate. Please don't, just don't ever check that anonymous button on your XenApp farm. Just don't. Fortunately, it's not default anymore. It used to be, but it's not default anymore. And yes, you could come back with use cases of kiosks and things like that. Take a really good look at those use cases and yeah, find a different way. Make it. Yes, sir.
A question, will there be a share of, I believe you said 6 and 8 or 12, I can't remember exactly, specific cipher suites that you utilize? Is there a way that you can?
I am happy to share my favorite ciphers. Yes, I can. We will put that up on my CUGC somewhere, and I will share my cipher list. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Authentication, right. Don't allow anonymous anything. Yes, you can come up with use cases for them, but if you are if you are your organization's security guru, you know, may or may not be the security officer, but if you're the person who is most directly responsible, make a case for no anonymous access ever, ever, ever. Do be careful about who gets access to what. I had a very interesting conversation just a couple of hours ago about authorization. Company I'm at right now, I'm actually sitting on a customer site right now doing a very large design for them around this, and we were talking about user authorization. So we're designing NetScalers, Global Reach, GSLB. We're designing lots of different farms for them. The farms are going to be segregated into their own network segments. We'll talk about that in a little bit too. But they were talking about who gets access to what. And I'm like, okay, well, you know, within that you have whatever rules you have. He goes, oh, no, we use Fortinet. I'm like, do tell. And so, you know, it's a program that allows user-based authentication into certain resources within an organization. I'm like, this is interesting. Again, always learning. This is not a product I had been exposed to before. So again, as I'm listening to this security person talk about this, I'm like, yeah, I can totally support that, because once the user is into a virtual desktop, that user is A, in that network segment, B, is authenticated, and that's all they need. Where are you coming from and who are you? And then they take it from there as to who has access to what. And it was really, really a good conversation. So there you go. That's a good thought about authorization. But of course, the opposite of that, don't go Wild West and open up all applications to all users. Same company I'm at right now is doing a massive redesign. They had one big flat network. Everybody had access to everything. And security and networks apparently have been fighting the fight for years and years and years to say, we need to fix this, and finally come around to say, okay, we're going to fix it. We're going to make new virtualized infrastructure. We're going to, you know, authenticate everyone at the front door. Everyone goes through the NetScaler to authenticate. Yes, thank you, please. I absolutely hate deployments where we have that two-layer deployment where you have the front door NetScaler and the back door storefront, and people go through the storefront. You lose some auditing capability that way. You lose some authentication capability that way. You lose some authorization capability that way. If everyone can go through the NetScaler and treat everyone that's not in the data center as untrusted, your life's going to be a whole lot better. Auditing, log everything, everything. Get Splunk, spend the money. Splunk is worth it. Log everything. Well, but that has a problem. Retain the logs because, you know, auditing and subpoenas and things like that exist, but also analyze the logs. Don't just let them sit there. Do something with that data. And I'll plug myself for a synergy topic that I'm going to do at a Meet the Experts Theater come synergy timeframe in May, where I'm going to talk about machine learning. Citrix is doing some great things around machine learning with Citrix Analytics, but there is more things you can do. Yes, I'm looking right at you. Your organization has data sitting, doing nothing. Figure out what you can do with that. Yes, sir.
And Chris, it's, I think, really cool to point out that Splunk itself has its own set of machine learning capabilities, which allow you to do things like look for trends, thresholds, and so forth. So definitely worth investigating.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Any customer I go into, they either use Splunk or are looking at it, which is number one, it's good for Splunk. But again, I've used Splunk in some fashion now for better than 10 years. And it's still my go-to program because they just do it right. They take all of that data and they index it down into digestible forms. So that's really great. Okay, do's and don'ts, the fourth. Network segregation and switch configuration. Oh, I love this one. So we already talked a little bit about VLANs and separate security zones. So yes, hopefully you have, you know, the concept of a DMZ, you have the concept of a user zone, you have the concept of a server zone, and so on and so forth. You have different zones in different regions you have things like extranets and intranets and all that good kind of stuff. But you have, the whole point is you have segregation of security. So whenever someone wants to bypass a security boundary, they have to follow a check. One of my favorite configurations was setting up a PCI infrastructure for a financial company, and the PCI auditor wanted to put every single one of their desktops in scope, which means all several thousand user desktops could potentially have access to PCI information. But the company said, oh, no, we can't do that. What do we do? What we did, we set up a proxy. We set up a Citrix jump host for them where the users could come in to the Citrix jump host, and then from there, that was the only place that had access to the PCI information. None of that information ever left the PCI zone. So the Citrix deployment was in scope, the user desktops were out of scope. Now, of course, the auditor immediately came up and hit print screen and said, you fail. We convinced him that that was not necessarily a legitimate test because you could also just take a picture of the screen with your phone. But, you know, there is something to be said for background checking your employees in that case. And there are plenty of stories around that too. So do separate your security zones. Don't overcomplicate it though. I have gone into customers where they have so many different VLANs that they've run out of VLAN tags. They've used all 4,000. And then what? Then what do you do? Okay, well, we'll put this one over here. We'll put that one over there. Oh, we can't do this. We can't do that. You know, they have layer 2 routing and VLANs everywhere. And it just gets to be a nightmare. So again, common sense. Yes, you do want to segregate, but don't overcomplicate. And my favorite one of all, switch ACLs. Please don't use them. Please, 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 please. I'm begging you. Don't let me come into your organization as a consultant and find switch ACLs. Because, oh God. A couple of organizations that I'm thinking of that use them, one that I just finished up with a contract a couple of weeks ago, it was the weirdest one ever. It was a high security federal agency, and they had switch ACLs everywhere. Their switch configurations were tens of thousands of lines long. So basically everywhere from the inside out, every single packet was checked and rechecked to make sure that it could get from point A to point B. Getting those NetScalers to talk to each other, oh boy, was that fun. Now, the interesting other side to that story is the fact that I was able to sit with their networks and firewall person and on the fly in production with no change control, make changes to those ACLs, and we got everything working. Kudos to them for being able to be that flexible, but wait a minute, you have that super duper high level of security with no change control wrapped around it? Yeah, that's definitely one of those when security goes wrong things, because ouch. So there are so many different ways of doing internal network security, again, with the segregation, with things like that, without using the switch ACLs. It just makes your network administrators' lives so much more complicated. So if you can get rid of those, please do. Here's a big one. Here's one that I keep saying time and time and time again. And it's actually interesting from my from one of my Synergy sessions last year. It was Joe Shonk and I were doing cloud security. And we kind of did, we structured the talk as kind of the 100 level, 200 level, 300 level, 400 level security lessons. And one of the pieces of feedback, which again, it's something that we kind of put forth through the entire talk, but one of the pieces of feedback was, I didn't really learn anything new. It was all the same stuff. That's the whole point. Yes. Security best practices that you have on premises are absolutely the same security best practices that you need to have in the cloud. Separate your networks out, do your basic security, do your firewalls, do your VLANs, VNetworks or whatever they happen to be in whichever cloud you're in. But absolutely, you need to apply that same security policy. You, the consumer of that cloud service, need to make sure that your security policies are set in your cloud, because don't rely on Microsoft or AWS to do them for you. They will not. So make sure you do your security. And do's and don'ts the last. Firewalls. Everybody likes firewalls, right? Do employ layer 3 stateful firewalls. I can't really say anything more to it than that. You should have firewalls. They should be stateful. It is an interesting conversation that I have when talking about a NetScaler, because a NetScaler is a security device. It is designed to sit on multiple networks, not least of which directly on the internet, and handle traffic in a secure fashion. Almost 80% of my deployments, however, are a NetScaler sitting single-armed in a DMZ, which completely removes most of its capability. But that's how people want to do it, because when I get asked the question, but is the NetScaler a stateful firewall? The answer is no, it is not. It's not intended nor designed to do that. It is a proxy. And you know, a lot of security admins live and die by their firewall, and yes, that is a bad thing. And they absolutely have to have control over networks by their firewalls. There are other things that you can and should do, because it's not the end all and be all of security. Okay, great. I have a web server. I have my firewall that has opened up. Maybe you don't like port 80. Maybe you think, hey, you know, port 80 is insecure. I don't want to do that. I'm only going to open port 443. Okay, I have my firewall open to my web server, port 443. I'm secure. Yes? Maybe? No, not at all. Because what happens over port 443? You don't know. Number one, it's encrypted. Maybe you have a decryption schema where you can see the traffic comes in. Guess what a NetScaler can do? But so many security admins look at those firewalls and think we're good, we're secure. No, you're not. Because there's a very important piece to that, which is layer 7. It's the application that you need to have a look at. So there's that traffic coming over port 443. The network firewall just looks at layer 3 and says, this IP address, this port, you're good to go. Doesn't look at a single other thing. A layer 7 application firewall, again, on a NetScaler, is one of those things that will take a look at that traffic, will decrypt it, and will analyze it for any kind of security vulnerabilities. I could tell so many stories about that, about application firewall deployments where the users were overwhelmed by what was generated, and the second you turn on app firewall, if you've never done it, you check the box to turn it on and you set everything to blocking, you will break every single application you have. Because you have to, when you first start application firewall, you turn it on in non-blocking, learning mode, and then you wait 30 days and you analyze what you get.
To address what you said earlier, Chris, which I think is a really important point, if you institute some degree of geo-blocking ahead of time, I think that can be extremely beneficial as well, because not only will you cut down a lot of traffic, but you'll also improve your overall security situation.
Oh yeah. There is a way on a NetScaler, I invite you to Google this configuration, using the location database on a NetScaler, you can block certain networks. I was at a healthcare company where they said, we want US addresses only. I said, really? Do you know how complicated that is to do? He said, we don't care. So I went down through the location database and blocked every single non-US subnet that there was. And they were happy as a peach. So it's not a small undertaking to do such a thing, but there are configurations out there that do exactly that, where it's like, hey, we never, ever need to see traffic from Singapore. Okay, that gets blocked. You know, I remember I had a customer, this is way back when, that we basically blocked the entire island of Taiwan because they kept getting DOSed from Taiwan. For whatever reason, we just ended up blocking them at even up at the router level and just never let that traffic in. All right, Do use a logging indexer. We talked about Splunk a little bit. We let it's the amount of data. If you are not looking at AI and machine learning and deep learning, please do come to my Meet the Experts talk at Synergy in May. We will dig into that. We will dig into how important it is. We will dig into how much you need to be learning it right now. And trust me, from my perspective of, as much experience as I have with Citrix, and I'm getting myself into machine learning, I'm teaching myself things like TensorFlow and Apache Spark and stuff like that. It's not easy. I will not even give you any kind of illusion that this is an easy concept to get your head wrapped around. It is difficult, but it is something you need to know. Do use intrusion prevention. So many of those out there, anything from Snort to the semantic products, anything else like that, but you have the same problem. You have so much data, it's a full-time job, at least one person's full-time job, to be able to analyze that data, to see the attacks, to be able to react to the attacks. Once again, I'm going to come back to machine learning and say a program, an algorithm can help you do this. Last point, don't hog tie your users, no matter what you do. If you try to lock things down, if you try to put all those security controls in place, I will give you a quote from Star Wars. The more you tighten your grip, the more things will slip through your fingers. Users will find a way to get around your security if it is too tight and prevents them from doing their job. So please don't hog tie your users. All right, wrapping it up and putting a bow on it. We have the triangle of IT security wisdom. We had security, we had cost, we had usability. We want to strike a balance. Again, where does that point lie for you? Does it lie directly in the middle? Does it lie slightly to one side or another? Maybe it does. That's a personal decision for you to make and for your organization to make. But it is definitely a decision that there must be a balance struck. And then we'll put a pretty pink bow on it and we'll call it good. All right, so at this point, questions, comments, witty anecdotes, fruit? Nah, can't throw it. Nah. So, anyone have anything?
Well, we have nothing currently in the queue, Chris, but folks, this is your big opportunity to speak up and take advantage here. And even if you can't think of anything offhand, as Stephanie pointed out earlier, there will be a publication, of course, of the recording of this webinar and the ability to continue the discussion on the CUGC website.
Mm-hmm. And as promised, I will snag that my preferred list of ciphers, and I will post that up on CUGC somewhere.
Awesome. And one other question actually that occurred to me. What do you recommend, Chris, to folks who spend a lot of time configuring all kinds of complicated security policies and such in terms of being able to deal with a disaster recovery situation? Or if somebody suddenly leaves who may be the one and only individual who really knows the ins and outs of these kinds of things and essentially leaves the company kind of high and dry with not knowing things. So maybe you can address that.
Mm-hmm. There was one other slide. So, I had as I'm going there, as I'm doing timing on the presentation and things like that, I originally had 7 points and not 5. And I combined 2 of them and I got rid of one of them. The one I got rid of was documentation. And again, I struggled mightily with this as far as, is this a topic that I should cover? And, so thank you for the question. And that is the answer to that question right there, is documentation. And trust me, I have had the situation where I went into a company, again, it was one of those things of, hey, oh my God, we need someone like this week, can you come help us? And I happened to be available. I flew to the location and I said, okay, so what's the problem? So, well, we have this NetScaler, it's half configured. I'm like, okay, well, where's the person that got configured? Well, he got hit by a bus. And I laughed. Instinctively, I just laughed. I go, oh, okay, really? He said, no, seriously, he got hit by a bus. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, damn, I'm sorry. So yeah, when I say jokingly that your configuration and your organization has to pass the Mack truck test, yeah, it happens. Someone leaves, someone gets hit by a bus, and all of a sudden you are left high and dry with nothing, you know. And exactly the same thing goes for disaster recovery. You know, when someone builds a system, they build it very often single-threaded. Okay, how do I take exactly that same infrastructure and duplicate it, but duplicate it with security in mind? The fact that databases have to replicate, that users have to get from one place to the other. There has to be algorithms to say go here or here. You know, I'm thinking of medical healthcare industries and their EMR software that does not like redundancy. It exists in one place and one place only. And failing that stuff over is a pain. So yeah, you know, it's my best answer for that is document, document, document.
Great. Few more questions have rolled in the meantime, Chris. Could you please talk a little bit more about the NetScaler one-arm deployment in the DMZ and what your preference is, and why do you think one mode is better than the other in the DMZ?
Absolutely. So a NetScaler, as I said, is a security device. It is designed to inspect packets and allow them from point A to point B. First thing, the very first thing you should do in any NetScaler, go into your settings, go into your modes, turn off layer 3 routing. A NetScaler does not need to do it unless you're setting it up as an SSL VPN or something similar like that. Turn that off, because if it is just an ICA proxy, if it is just an application proxy, it does not need to route packets from directly through itself. Every single packet should be inspected, re-headered, and then passed on. So as far as that DMZ mode goes, like I said, I would give at least 60, if not 80% of my deployments are in that single arm DMZ mode, where there is one connection into the NetScaler and it sits behind a firewall. And they use the firewall to handle all the traffic, management included, in and out of the NetScaler. And that just completely removes the effectiveness of a NetScaler and the fact that it is intended to take a packet from point A, analyze it, do the things that it needs to do to it based on its policies, and then pass it on to point B. And if you are putting that in and out through one particular network connection, you are removing that ability. Yes, it still does it, but it does not do it nearly as effectively. So the conversation that I so very frequently have is, I want to bypass your firewall with a NetScaler. And again, people just go ballistic at that. But that is totally what it's intended to do. My preferred way of deploying a NetScaler, it should physically, layer 2, it should physically touch every single network that it needs access to. It should have an out-of-band management. It should have a front end. It should possibly have a DMZ access if you have resources there. It should have a back-end access. It might have multiple back-end accesses if you have several different farms or several different security zones for different applications. The NetScaler, let the NetScaler do its job. And its job is to be that security gateway inbound. Now, and that's where I really draw the distinction with a NetScaler. A NetScaler can handle your traffic inbound, handle and secure inbound traffic. Firewall, absolutely, that's outbound. That secures that outbound traffic from your users. But inbound, let the NetScaler handle it and let it touch all the networks it needs to.
Great response, Chris, thank you. Then we have, regarding the IP reputation, is it an on-off option? Is there, in fact, no option to customize it or anything? Have you ever seen an issue with that binary choice?
You know, I have heard IP reputation as a buzzword for quite some time in the industry. I have yet to see a very effective deployment of it. Maybe I'm in the minority, maybe other people have, I don't know. Me personally, I have not seen an effective deployment of IP reputation. Again, does this come back to who is, you know, it comes down to the basic of who's a hacker and who's not. Well, hackers are smart and they're going to move around IPs. So IP reputation is not very effective. The fact that where a person is one day is not where they're going to be the next day. So, I mean, as far as, again, the buzzword, the functionality, can a NetScaler do it? Sure. Have I ever implemented it? Nope.
And I think to your point is, you know, is it kind of a futile effort? Because, I mean, I've actually seen very similar pseudo organizations hop around on literally sometimes a daily basis in terms of grabbing a range of IP addresses, making use of them, then abandoning them and going on to something else.
Mm-hmm.
Very good point.
It's just turning doorknobs.
Another question for you, Chris. What level of security, given your experience in particular in this area, does a typical business need relative to what you do with government installations?
It is all over the map. I get some, as I said, I get some high security agencies that have things like switch ACLs and then no change control. And I have to scratch my head going, really? Are you kidding, right? I get some financial customers that are just absolutely insane with security. The absolute most secure, there's one exception to this, but the absolute most secure companies that I've been at is healthcare. They take that so seriously as far as HIPAA concerns go, as far as segmentation, as far as firewalls, as far as security policy and training. They, more than any other industry, healthcare takes it the most serious. And again, it's interesting to hear, you know, I'm sitting in a particular one that I'm thinking of, and I'm doing a NetScaler configuration and things like that. And I'm just on the other side of a partition, a cube farm for me is like their customer service area. And throughout the day, I'm listening to their customer service representative field call after call after call after call of phishers, because people are trying to get information out of there. And these guys, you know, I will give serious credit to the CSRs that are sitting over there. They are well trained to handle it. And it was really, really impressive to hear them just shut these people down. So that was cool. Now, the one exception that I talked about was, and I have to figure out how I want to term this, because if I say, I don't even have to say who they are, I just have to say what they do, and you know instantly who it is. It is it's a manufacturing concern, I'll say that. And the level of security that this particular manufacturing concern had is far and away past anything I've ever seen in my life. They are a federal contractor. They build certain things for the federal government. And the level of security that I had to deal with there was beyond anything. But again, I will give credit where credit is due. They did it smart. It was secure. It was locked down. The users were well trained. Everyone knew their job and how to do it and how to get around it. The person I was working with kept apologizing. Oh, I have to hop through this jump host and that jump host to get to our management network. I'm like, you're cool. As long as you get to it, that's fine. So yeah, it was really, really well done security. I was impressed.
To your point also, Chris, I think it's really very vital to realize that you can implement all kinds of technological means in order to attempt to protect yourself. But unless your staff and your employees within the company are aware of and well trained as to social engineering issues, you still are, of course, vulnerable in that particular area. And that's a really tough one because, I mean, you know, look at all you've inherited $20 million from a third cousin in Nigeria kind of thing. And the fact that, you know, decades literally later, these things are still going out must mean that somebody must be still responding to it. And in fact, just to take another 15 seconds, I actually, something like 35 or 40 years ago, received a written letter from Nigeria asking for this kind of thing.
Yep.
Long before the internet and email became, popular or available. And the fact that, we still see this kind of thing is really kind of scary.
Yep. I have, it's interesting to see the idea of the phishing scams and things like that. And again, I remember very distinctly when I first saw this email come in from the Nigerian prince, and I immediately knew what it was without even, knowing what it was. And I remember reporting it to the FBI, and was surprised to get a response back from them saying, "Oh yeah, we know about this. It's pretty rampant." I'm like, seriously? Wow. But I have heard numbers in the hundreds of thousands of US dollars per month that these people get on a regular basis. So yeah, it's worth it.
We are through the entire queue of questions, Chris.
Excellent. All right. Oops. Back up. Back up. Back up. There we go. No, I don't know. Whatever. Okay. All right. Whatever. I'm going to stop clicking now. Where was the slide I wanted to be on? That was the slide I wanted to be on. There we go. Okay. So yeah, thank you all for coming. I'm actually surprised I filled up the entire hour. I kept pacing myself out at about 40 minutes, so I'm really glad we had questions, really glad we had some interaction, and that's about all I have. So thanks so much for coming.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Tobias. I just have a couple of housekeeping details. Let me pull up the screen really quickly for you. Just wanted to pass along a couple of things. So we do have more webinars coming up. What happened? My thing that I pushed the button too. I had lost control of my screen this time. We do have some more webinars coming up. We have a Women in Tech webinar coming up in March, followed by Agile. And then we also have a follow-up to this webinar. It's not quite yet open for registration, but we are going to do another Ask Me Anything security edition. So you'll see some familiar names on there. We have Patrick and Chris right now from today's presentation, and also joining us will be Martin Zuzek and Thorsten Rode, and then I think we have a couple of other names that may join us. So be sure to check out mycugc.org. I'm going to throw a link in the chat for you right now. There you go. That's the events calendar that shows you all of our upcoming local meetings, webinars, everything that we have going on, including our XL events. And speaking of XL events, if you are near Texas, next week is our first ever CUGC XL. It'll be in Austin, and it's going to be a full day of awesome content from these speakers. It's going to be a really great day. So if you're able to go, please go ahead and register. You can find that link through the same link that I put in the chat for you. So be sure to check that out. And I also put in the chat, I know, Chris, you mentioned that you'll be at Synergy. If you have not purchased your Synergy Pass yet, CUGC members do have a special discount. There's a link in the chat for you to our CUGC at Synergy page that gives you the discount code. That code is worth $500 to you. That is the cheapest price for a Synergy Pass that you'll find right now. So take advantage of that if you haven't already purchased your pass. And finally, just be sure that you constantly check us out on Twitter and at mycugc.org. We've always got something going on: webinars, blog posts, forum discussions, local meetings. Just get involved where you can. The more the merrier always. And again, just want to let you know, I'll send you a follow-up email probably sometime tomorrow. It'll have links to the recordings from today, the slide decks that we have, and any resources that our speakers from today passed along. There's also will be a link to the forum thread and that you can ask more questions. Any questions we didn't get to today, I'll try to get those answered for you and put those answers out in that same forum thread. Again, that'll be in your email. And again, I just appreciate everyone being here. So thanks again, Chris and Tobias, and to all of our speakers. Hopefully everyone is well versed in what to do now, right? Security is an ongoing problem and something you have to stay on top of. But I think we had 3 great sessions today and lots of great information. Alrighty, so I hope all of you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.